Chapter 2697. Zhang Tianyi smiled. That smile made Chun Zhao want to leave a mark on his face. That jade of tranquility can be said to be valuable, but it can also be said to be worthless. Since I can make it mutate in a month's time, I can naturally make a second piece. It's nothing more than a slightly larger piece of jade. Chun Zhao's mood immediately turned sour. As expected, he really couldn't beat Zhang Tianyi in scheming. Chun Zhao wondered if he should just destroy the calming jade. Should he let Zhang Tianyi taste what it felt like to be fed shit? Forget it. He shouldn't harm others without benefiting himself. If Zhang Tianyi was his enemy, Chun Zhao definitely wouldn't mind feeding him shit. Zhang Tianyi brought the employees of Jingshin Mountain to a private room. As soon as he closed the door, Zhang Tianyi slapped the woman in the traditional Chinese attire. Zhang Tianyi's expression was cold. Didn't I tell you not to do unnecessary things? Not to care about that asterisk shoal? You just wouldn't listen. Great. Now you even need me to save your lives. Boss. Sorry. Everyone lowered their heads, not daring to look at Zhang Tianyi. They'd never seen their boss so angry. They'd originally been driven into a corner and were taken in by Zhang Tianyi to receive his protection. It could be said that Zhang Tianyi was their life savior. Moreover, Zhang Tianyi had always taken good care of them. Almost every time they were in danger, Zhang Tianyi would stand up for them. Jingshin Mountain had been established recently. They'd also been invited by Zhang Tianyi to help him look after the place. They were grateful to Zhang Tianyi and happy to have a job. This time, Zhang Tianyi had protected them again. They weren't disciples of Dragon Tiger Mountain, but they respected Zhang Tianyi more than the disciples. But this time, Zhang Tianyi was furious. Do you know that Asterisk Shoal will really kill you? The number of enemies that died in his hands is more than Old Monster Kunlai. Even if it's Old Monster Kunlai, I'm confident I can save you. But if that bastard wants to kill you, I can't even protect you. Everyone was ashamed, feeling that they'd caused trouble for Zhang Tianyi. From Chun Zhao and Zhang Tianyi's conversation, they understood. They understood that Chun Zhao and Zhang Tianyi were on the same level. This made them even more uneasy. After all, they were going to monitor an existence as powerful as Zhang Tianyi. It was no different from suicide. Not only were they ashamed, but in their opinion, they had brought Zhang Tianyi great trouble. Forget it. Zhang Tianyi's anger came and went quickly, and he quickly calmed down. I originally wanted to trick that bastard. Although it's different from the plan, it's just the right thing to say. There's no need to be secretive anymore. Boss, should we go apologize to that person? No need. Zhang Tianyi waved his hand. You guys are not on the same level as him. Whether he accepts it or not, he has to give me face. Moreover, you guys might not be sincere in your apology, so it's better to do your own things honestly. The next day, Chun Zhao sat in the yard for the entire day. The furniture in the room that was broken yesterday had also been replaced. However, the people who came to change the furniture were all ordinary employees. None of the people who had been taught a lesson by Chun Zhao yesterday appeared before him. Chun Zhao sat in the yard for the entire day. Chun Zhao wanted to relax his body and mind and calm himself down. However, Emohan was not so happy. He could not go anywhere. He wanted to turn on the TV to pass the time. He would be scolded by Chun Zhao for being too noisy. In the evening, Xiao Yezi's family passed by Chun Zhao's yard. It seemed that the family had a good time today. The family was happy and harmonious, passing by with laughter. At this time, Xiao Yezi saw Chun Zhao sitting in the yard. Uncle, the bright voice interrupted Chun Zhao's calmness. Of course, with Chun Zhao lying on his side, no one would believe that he was meditating. Chun Zhao responded with a smile. Xiao Yezi ran in. Xiao Yezi's parents also followed in. Hello, Mr. Chun. Hello. Chun Zhao sat up and held Xiao Yezi in front of him. Xiao Yezi, tell me, where did you go today? We went to the water park and Dayu Lake. We also took a speedboat. It was amazing, Xiao Yezi said excitedly. Chun Zhao widened his eyes and pretended to be surprised. Xiao Yezi, aren't you afraid? No, Xiao Yezi isn't afraid. It's not scary at all. Ha! Mr. Chun, have you eaten? Let's go eat together. I heard that there's a roasted camel made by a chef from West Asia, Mr. Yi said. Just then, Mr. Yi realized that there was another person in the living room. We'll treat you tonight. Mr. Chun, come with your friend. Chun Zhao was about to refuse when his stomach growled. He had not eaten for the whole day. He needed to preserve his appetite for the big meal that was coming soon. Chun Zhao blushed, which was rare. Okay. Chun Zhao finally stood up. Emohan, come out and let's eat together. Emohan walked out listlessly. Chun Zhao had not eaten for the whole day. He had not eaten either. Chun Zhao did not allow him to eat. He said that he wanted to starve, so everyone would starve together. Mr. Yi was quite generous, but he regretted it when it came to the barbecue. Chun Zhao was completely a reincarnated hungry ghost. No matter how much food was served, he would stuff it into his mouth. Mr. Chun, eat slowly and drink something. Okay, thanks. Chun Zhao finished the free drink in one gulp. Waiter, another one. Mr. Ye's expression was somewhat awkward. The drinks here were free, but the barbecue was not. Not only was it not free, but it was also very expensive. Mr. Chun, how long has it been since you last ate? Mr. Yi felt that Chun Zhao and Imo Han were probably traveling in poverty. However, he could not understand why they would stay in such an expensive Jingxin villa if they were traveling in poverty. After moving in, they did not go out to play and were starving. Why do they have to do this? Big appetite. Chun Zhao's mouth was filled with food. He chewed casually and swallowed. Mr. Yi looked at Imo Han. Imo Han was relatively more normal. However, Imo Han did not say anything. He only said that his surname was Mo when he first talked to Mr. Yi. Mr. Yi felt that the two were a strange combination. One was approachable, while the other was unapproachable. Chun Zhao had actually restrained himself this time. He did not really eat to his heart's content. He was not even 10% full. After all, many people here were here to play. He had to leave some for others. Waiter, bill please. Don't. I said I'll pay. Mr. Yi immediately stopped him. It's fine, Chun Zhao said casually. When the waiter reached them, Mr. Yi still wanted to pay. You really can't do this. I said I'll pay, so I'll pay. Sir, it's a total of 45,000. Do you want to pay by card or cash? The waiter looked at everyone with a smile. Mr. Ye's expression froze. Chun Zhao tossed the card to the waiter. Card. Chapter 2698. When Mr. Yi saw the credit card, he realized that he had made a mistake. He had thought that Chun Zhao and Mo Han were two poor people who had no money to travel. He suddenly realized that Chun Zhao was rich and richer than him. But to be honest, Chun Zhao did not look like a rich person from the way he ate. Chun Zhao finished eating and wiped his greasy hands on his clothes. Mr. and Mrs. Yi were speechless. Mom, I'm cold, Xiao Yezi suddenly said. Chun Zhao saw Xiao Yezi crossing his arms. His face seemed to be covered in frost. His body was also emitting a cold aura. While breathing, Xiao Yezi actually breathed out white air. It was early spring and the temperature was not high, but it should not be this cold. What's wrong with Xiao Yezi? It's okay. Kids are afraid of the cold. Mr. Yi forced a smile and reached out to hug Xiao Yezi. But as soon as he touched Xiao Yezi, he suddenly retracted his hand from the cold. He quickly took off his coat and wrapped it around Xiao Yezi. Sorry, we'll go back first. Okay. Goodbye. Goodbye. Mr. and Mrs. Yi hurriedly left with Xiao Yezi. Mr. Chun, that boy doesn't seem to have an ordinary spiritual pulse, Imo Han said to Chun Zhao. Not an ordinary spiritual pulse? What does that mean? Mr. Chun, how much do you know about spiritual pulses? Chun Zhao was silent for a while, and then said, Not at all. Spiritual pulses can also be understood as spiritual meridians. Imo Han explained in detail. Imo Han explained in detail. In fact, it is a kind of innate magical ability or a kind of innate talent. Even if it is not awakened, it still has great potential. And after awakening, it can be said that it is 1,000 miles in a single day. Other people may not even be able to compare with this kind of innate spiritual vein in a single day's cultivation progress. That Xiao Yezi is such a genius? It's better to say that he's a monster than a genius. What? Is he possessed by a monster? No, I'm talking about his talent. Genius is not enough to describe his excellence. When I heard Celestial Master Zhang say that Kunlai wanted to devour that boy, I already had my doubts. Even a spiritual pulse shouldn't make that kind of thousand-year-old monster go to such lengths. Now I see something. That boy is not ordinary. The demon race has thousand-year-old demons, while the human race has thousand-year-old spirit veins. What does this thousand-year spirit vein mean? For example, Mr. Chun, you can find an ordinary female spiritual pulse and make sure she doesn't awaken it. Let her live a normal life and let her get married and have children. The child she gives birth to must be a girl. When she gives birth to her first child, use her as a blood sacrifice and pass the spiritual pulse to her child. Then let the child repeat her mother's growth path. This repeated process is the continuous sublimation of the spiritual pulse. Repeat like this for 1,000 years. When a certain generation of spiritual pulse gives birth to a boy, it means the fruit is ripe. Chen Zhao frowned. You call this a fruit? Chen Zhao thought that he was cold-blooded enough, but when he heard this process, he only felt nauseous. Just now, with every breath that little Yi took, he exhaled a thick amount of spiritual energy. He is like a perpetual motion machine that continuously inhales and exhales spiritual energy. For anyone, he is a huge treasure. If he can awaken, then he will be a peerless genius that only appears once in 1,000 years. But if he falls into the hands of the demons, then he will be as precious as Tang Seng's meat. No, didn't you say that every generation of the spiritual pulse's mother has to be sacrificed to her child? Doesn't Xiao Yezi's mother need it? That woman shouldn't be Xiao Yezi's biological mother, Emohan said. Emohan said, this kind of bloodline inheritance is necessary. How can it not be needed, especially in his generation? All the essence is condensed in the body of little Yezi's mother. If there is no blood sacrifice, how can little Yezi have such a pure bloodline? Chen Zhao didn't like this kind of bloodline. He didn't even like Xiao Yezi. Although Xiao Yezi was innocent, this kind of sinful inheritance was full of blood and cruelty. That child was most likely created by old monster Kunlai, Emohan said. Others don't have the time and energy to spend 1,000 years and go through dozens of generations of bloodline inheritance. Chen Zhao licked his lips and suddenly grinned. To some extent, he and I are the same kind of people. We both like to eat. Emohan thought of Chen Zhao's table manners and couldn't help but feel a chill. He didn't see Chen Zhao attack the Bay Island with his own eyes. But after the incident, he had seen some videos and photos. He had seen the Bay Island after Chen Zhao had ravaged it. He had seen the last trace left by the dragon, a pile of blood and flesh. And Mohan didn't want to see that hair-raising feeling a second time. Rather than saying that Chen Zhao had caused all of this, it would be more accurate to say that he was the biggest cause of trouble. Order me some more food. I didn't eat to my heart's content just now. Emohan was speechless. Did he feed all the food just now? Of course, Emohan didn't dare to not satisfy Chen Zhao's request. After all, if Chen Zhao wasn't full, it would be very scary. Perhaps he himself would become stale food. At that moment, the Yi couple returned to their room. Mr. Yi immediately turned on the electric fan to warm Xiao Yezi. Facing the hot wind from the electric fan, Xiao Yezi was still hugging her arms, her body shivering. Both Mr. and Mrs. Yi looked worried. They looked at Xiao Yezi worriedly. They were already used to Xiao Yezi's abnormal behavior. More accurately, they were used to it, but there was nothing they could do about it. Even the best doctor couldn't do anything about it. Until last month, a stranger came to their door. He told them that someone could solve it and asked them to send the child to Kunlai Mountain. He also left a map. At that time, they vaguely felt that something was wrong. So, they were careful and didn't send the child to Kunlai Mountain. But then, the situation took a turn for the worse. They were constantly attacked by supernatural powers, and the situation took a turn for the worse. Moreover, the situation took a turn for the worse. At the beginning, it was still an ordinary prank that was only meant to scare people. But as time passed, the situation became more and more serious. It even threatened their lives. Sometimes, when they were walking on empty ground, there would be objects falling from the sky for no reason. There were no buildings around them. They went to find someone to exorcise the ghosts, but in one night, the Taoist priest and monk were scared away. until they found an old Taoist priest. The old Taoist priest gave them 3 days of peace. But it was only 3 days of peace. Then it happened again. They found the old Taoist priest again. The old Taoist priest told them that there was someone in Jingshin Mountain who could solve their problem. Chapter 2699. Whoosh. Mr. Yi woke up from his nightmare. Recently, he'd been woken up by nightmares almost every day. But ever since he'd come to Jingshin Villa, he'd had a good night's sleep, which was rare. But on the second night, the haunting nightmare came again. It was that disturbing and chilling nightmare again. The process repeated every night. The unbreakable abyss seemed like it could swallow him at any time. He glanced at his wife and child, who were sleeping soundly. Mr. Yi didn't wake them up. Instead, he got up quietly and took out a cigarette that he hadn't smoked in a long time. Feeling his way in the dark, he went to the yard. He hadn't smoked in a long time. The smell of smoke was bad for children's growth. Just then, Mr. Yi realized that Chun Zhao was also in the yard opposite the fence. Chun Zhao was lying on his side, one hand resting on his head. Mr. Yi looked at the time. It was 2 or 3 in the morning, and the temperature was below 10 degrees. He didn't have anything on him and was wearing thin clothes. Didn't he feel cold? Mr. Yi walked to the fence and called out softly, "Mr. Chun." Chun Zhao turned his head and realized that it was Mr. Yi. "Mr. Yi, it's so late. You're still awake?" Chun Zhao sat up. "Get up and have a smoke. You want one too?" "I'll have one." Chun Zhao took the cigarette that Mr. Yi tossed over. Mr. Yi was about to throw the lighter to Chun Zhao when he realized that Chun Zhao had lit the cigarette himself. "Mr. Chun, you can't sleep either?" "I'm a bit hungry." Mr. Yi was speechless. "You're telling me you're hungry with your table manners today? What do you do, Mr. Chun?" "Me? I don't do anything," Chun Zhao said casually. "I just have some businesses and take the dividends." "So you're a big boss, huh?" Mr. Yi teased. He didn't think too much about it. Instead, he felt that Chun Zhao was probably this kind of person. He probably had some money, but he wasn't very cultured. "What about Mr. Mo?" "Him? He owes me some money. He's working for me now," Chun Zhao said. "Mr. Yi, what do you do?" "I'm the technical director of an internet company," Mr. Yi said. "I heard that it's very profitable now. Is it true? If I had known earlier, I would have invested in a network technology company as well." It's not as simple as you make it out to be. The companies you've heard of are all big companies that have already received early dividends. 99% of internet companies don't survive more than 3 years. Only the big companies are left. Mr. Chun, I advise you to be cautious about investing in internet technology. Even foreign investment banks find it difficult to accurately target their investments. In fact, most of their investments are wasted. All right, I'm just saying, it's getting late. I should go to bed. Mr. Chun, you should rest early too. I want to sleep too. Unfortunately, this will most likely be a sleepless night. All right, I won't accompany you. Mr. Yi turned around and returned to his room. Chun Zhao looked at the night sky and the dark clouds that were gradually spreading over. Just a moment ago, it was still bright and resplendent, but now it had lost all its luster. Soon, Jingshin Villa and the surrounding mountains were shrouded in dark clouds. Chun Zhao stretched. It seemed that the feast he'd been waiting for the whole night was finally going to be served. Under the rolling dark clouds, there seemed to be something huge hiding in them. At the top of a mountain outside of Jingshin Villa, an old man with a walking stick was looking down at Jingshin Villa from a distance. Behind the old man, there were 3 figures. The old man's back was leaning against the wall. His eyes were lifeless, as if he would die the next moment. However, his seemingly withered body gave off a heart-palpitating aura. He didn't move at all, but he still made people feel fear. The old man was the Kunlai ancestor. Currently, no one in the Huaxia supernatural world was as powerful as him. The title of 1,000-year-old demon was real and not an exaggeration at all. In addition, he was a descendant of the Kuanping. His status among the demons was also extremely respected. Of course, even with his 1,000-year-old cultivation and the descendant of the Kuanping, his lifespan was still limited. His cultivation was far from reaching the stage of immortality, and he didn't have the same lifespan as the heaven and earth, the sun and the moon. He was 1,500 years old now, but in the first 300 years, he hadn't entered Taoism. He was just a muddle-headed beast. Now, he didn't have much lifespan left. Ancestor, the child of the spirit vein, is in that villa. Yes, my eyes aren't playing tricks on me. I can see clearly. There was a hidden light in the Kunpeng ancestor's murky eyes. It seemed to be able to see through the night sky more than 2,000 meters away. The Kunpeng ancestor stood there quietly, looking down at the villa. He didn't do anything else. Ancestor, let's bring the child of the spirit vein here. Where's Zhang now? He's been lured away by Flying Swallow. Flying Swallow is leading a few dozen of its kind and pretending to attack Dragon Tiger Mountain. They can at least delay Zhang. Zhang for a day. Of course, this included the time to go back and forth. If Zhang Tianyi was at Dragon Tiger Mountain now, even if the Kunpeng ancestor personally led the team, he wouldn't dare to go to Dragon Tiger Mountain. As for Kunpeng ancestor's subordinate, Fian, it was only pretending to attack Mount Longhu. It wasn't really going to fight Mount Longhu. Flying Swallow only had one task, and that was to lure Zhang Tianshi back to Dragon Tiger Mountain. Zhang Tianyi won't be so easy to deal with. I've been fighting with the human race for thousands of years, but there's never been a cultivator as difficult to deal with as Zhang Tianyi. The Kunpeng ancestor said emotionally. Even if he left, he would have left a lot of tricks. Or maybe he didn't leave at all, but pretended to be lured away and then turned back midway. It's also possible. The Kunpeng ancestor had a deep understanding of Zhang Tianyi's methods. Whether it was a battle of wits or magic power, they had fought more than 10 times. But every time, they were at a disadvantage. Therefore, the Kunpeng ancestor really didn't want to fight Zhang Tianyi head-on. That was why he had the plan to lure Zhang Tianyi away. As long as Zhang Tianyi left, the small Jingxin villa wouldn't be able to stop him at all. Ancestor, although Zhang Tianyi's methods are extraordinary, he still makes mistakes. Even if he knows that Dragon Tiger Mountain was attacked by the monster race, he doesn't dare to take the risk. After all, that's his foundation. He has to leave even if he doesn't want to. In the end, the matter between the ancestor and the child of the spirit vein has nothing to do with him. I think he knows which is more important. Although that is the case, Old Zhang is not as simple as you think. Not only does Old Zhang possess great strength, he is also extremely proficient in scheming. Our plans are all done step by step, but Old Zhang is able to directly see through the result. Therefore, we absolutely cannot be careless in this operation. Chapter 2700. Just like how Zhang Tianyi was wary of Kunlai, Kunlai was also wary of Zhang Tianyi. After all, he'd never had an opponent who could suppress him in 1,000 years. And in this generation, Zhang Tianyi was the one who could suppress him and beat him up. After more than 10 clashes, Kunlai felt like he was going to die each time. Of course, he wouldn't tell his subordinates about such a shameful thing. So, he came back as the victor each time. Kunlai's subordinates were all arrogant now. They felt that even if Zhang Tianyi came, he wouldn't be able to stop Kunlai. So, they became more and more arrogant. Of course, they didn't understand that Kunlai was also bitter. Kunlai was powerful, but he didn't dare to act recklessly. Not to mention that Zhang Tianyi, that great god, was pressing down on him. Even the government wasn't something he could go against. If he dared to use a great spell to cover the sky of a city, there was no guarantee that his Kunlai mountain would eat a large nuclear bomb. Even in a suburb like this, he was very nervous. Of course, if he could solve the problem before Zhang Tianyi and the government arrived, everything would be fine. But since Kunlai dared to invade Jingxin Villa, he naturally made ample preparations. The situation isn't good. Kunlai actually brought all the vassal demons. There are still many guests in Jingxin Villa. Zhang Lan, use a calming talisman on the ordinary guests. No matter how chaotic it is outside, they can't get involved. Zhang Lan nodded. What about the cultivators? Do we need to ask them for help? This is Jingxin Villa's problem. We don't care about our reputation, but the boss needs it too. Even if we die, we can't let him down. That guest in room 048, he might have a solution, Zhang Lan said after a moment of hesitation. No need. He's him and we're us. No matter what situation we face, don't ask him for help. They've been taught a lesson last time, and then by Zhang Tianyi. The managers of Jingxin Villa all had some complaints about Chun Zhao. Zhang Lan could feel that these companions of hers weren't complaining, but it was better to say that they were acting out of spite. Right at this moment, everyone felt their breath stop for a moment. He's here! Fight! Everyone came to the gate of Jingxin Manor one after another. Everyone's face was filled with pride and determination. It could be said that they had all died once. Therefore, they were fearless. Old monster Kunlai's vassals also came. All of them were demons. A great demon like old demon Kunlai would be a demon king in ancient times. However, if the name of the demon king were to be released, the demon king would not be able to escape. The government will nuke you first. After the founding of the People's Republic, it wasn't just that they couldn't become spirits. Whoever dared to proclaim himself as king would be going against the government. In the Huaxia spirit world, hundreds of demons weren't considered a lot. After all, many demon clans had hundreds or even thousands of demon clans. In particular, the union of 10,000 immortals, the number one demon race force in the spirit world, claimed to have 1 million demon race members. That was the largest demon alliance in the world. Of course, the reason why the union of 10,000 immortals was so huge was largely because of the strong support of the government behind the union of 10,000 immortals. Therefore, rather than saying that the union of 10,000 immortals was a force in the spirit world, it was better to say that it was a public sect. However, old monster Kunlai's 100 or so vassals had been with him for at least 200 years. In other words, every demon here had at least 200 years of cultivation and above. None of these demons had taken human form. It wasn't that they didn't have cultivation. In fact, 100 years of cultivation was enough. But they still hadn't transformed. This was because they were proud of their demon form. They were the supreme demons of the demon race. On the other hand, there were only 12 employees of Jingxin Villa. The strongest among them was probably about the same as the weakest of old monster Kunlai's vassals. The difference in power couldn't be small. A demon with a human body and a monkey's head stood out from the crowd. The monkey demon carried a golden rod and was dressed very much like Sun Wukong. Of course, it was only their appearances that looked similar. Move if you don't want to die. The monkey pointed at the 12 employees with the golden rod. Humph! Do you really think you're Sun Wukong just because you're pretending? If there's really a Sun Wukong in this world, I'm afraid the first thing he would do is to kill you. The one who spoke was the manager of Jingxin Villa. He was well-dressed and had neatly combed hair. However, his cultivation was not weak. When the monkey demon heard this, he immediately hissed his teeth in anger. Old man, I'm going to tear you apart. The golden rod in the monkey demon's hand danced and smashed toward the manager's head with a golden lightning. The manager, on the other hand, was calm and collected. He pushed his glasses up with one hand. The golden rod collided with the manager's palm. However, the golden rod seemed to be pulled by a force and lost its original strength and trajectory. Even a monkey demon himself lost his balance and staggered 2 steps forward. The manager stepped forward and slammed his shoulder heavily into the monkey demon's chest. The monkey demon cried out and took a few steps back. The manager also took 2 steps back, relieved the force, and looked balanced. Although the monkey demon lost a move and a half, he was not injured. Playing with soft force. Good, I'm a cross cultivator. You and I are at loggerheads. The monkey demon grinned fiercely. Since ancient times, like yin and yang, the 2 main branches of strengthening, soft force and cross cultivators, have always been mortal enemies. It has to be said that fighting with soft force opponents is a very painful thing, because even if you have a lot of strength, you can't use it. Especially for cross cultivators like the monkey demon, their attacks are fierce and unparalleled. They are best at fighting head-on. Their favorite opponent is to fight head-on, because no matter whether they win or lose, they can use their strength to their heart's content. But against soft force opponents, no matter how much strength you have, you can't use it. Also, if you're not careful, the opponent can use your strength to fight back. That is the most uncomfortable part. The monkey demon and the manager exchanged dozens of rounds. The monkey demon was so mad that he almost bit someone, but he couldn't even catch the corner of his opponent's clothes. Actually, although the manager seemed to have the upper hand, he was actually walking on a tightrope. The monkey demon was hit a few times, but he was still unharmed. But if he was hit by the monkey demon once, he would lose the ability to fight and even his life. Clang, just as the man and the demon were fighting, a loud sound came from inside the wall. The people of Jingxin Villa couldn't help but change their expressions. Something happened inside. The manager's eyes turned cold. Inside, the monkey demon grinned and said, "Do you really think that this is everything? Can we really only go in through the door?" Divine Emperor of the Nine Heavens. Chapter 2701. Meanwhile, in Jingxin Villa, a few monsters charged into a suite without any fear. This was the suite that Mr. Ye's family lived in. When they heard the commotion outside, Mr. Ye's family had already woken up. However, they didn't dare to go out to see what was going on. Mrs. Yi hugged Xiao Yezi and looked out the window in fear. Mr. Yi picked up the leg of the chair and hid behind the door. However, judging from his actions and expression, he was also unfamiliar with this kind of business. But the next moment, a claw passed through the door and grabbed Mr. Ye's neck. "Ah!" Mrs. Yi screamed in fear. The claw was about to crush Mr. Yi. Suddenly, the floor-to-ceiling window shattered. A white light flashed and the claw was chopped off. The white light didn't stop there after chopping off the claw. It shot directly into the hole in the door. Then a scream came from outside. At the same time, blood spurted in. Having escaped death, Mr. Yi turned to look out the window. He saw a man in a Taoist robe standing outside the window. "Come out," the Taoist urged. "Ah, what? If you delay any longer, your whole family will die here." Mr. Yi snapped out of his daze and went over to hold his wife's hand. "Let's go." The family of three escaped from the broken floor-to-ceiling window. Just then, the door was also smashed. One of them was covered in blood and had a broken arm. It was a monster with a tiger head and a human body. Mr. Ye's family had been deeply involved in supernatural incidents. But now, they'd gone from supernatural incident to a magical one. "Demon monster, let's go." The Taoist grabbed Mr. Yi and walked out. "Taoist, that's... Master sent me to protect your family in secret," the Taoist said hurriedly. "Now's not the time to explain. Leave this place with me." Mr. Ye's family didn't have a chance to speak before they were dragged away by the Taoist. When they passed by the suite next door, Mr. Yi looked toward the yard for some reason. He realized that Chen Zhao was still lying on his side, facing the door. His eyes met with theirs. "Hello." Chen Zhao smiled and waved. Mr. Yi wanted to remind his friendly neighbor to be careful, but the Taoist didn't even give them a chance to speak. "Mr. Chen." Before Mr. Yi could finish his sentence, he had already been dragged away. Chen Zhao glanced at the monsters chasing after them. He had no intention of attacking. At least, not yet. Just then, one of the monsters suddenly circled into Chen Zhao's yard. "What can I do for you?" Chen Zhao warmly greeted the monster with two snake heads. "Fake foreigner." The twin-headed snake monster opened its mouth and spat out a poisonous mist. Hiss! Chen Zhao took a deep breath and sucked in all the poisonous mist. "Not bad," Chen Zhao praised. "You?" The twin-headed snake demon thought that Chen Zhao was just an ordinary person. He just wanted to find a snack to eat. After all, it was not easy to get a living person to eat these days. In the end, after one move, he discovered that he seemed to have hid an iron plate. At this time, Imo Han came out of the room. He was quite impressed by this twin-headed snake demon, especially when Chen Zhao was hungry. Chen Zhao looked at the twin-headed snake demon. "Show me your true power, or you're dead." Imo Han looked at the twin-headed snake demon, already mourning for him in his heart. Hearing Chen Zhao's words, the twin-headed snake demon immediately revealed its true form. It was a 10-meter-long, twin-headed black snake. Chen Zhao finally sat up too. Imo Han shook his head. The double-headed black snake that had revealed its true form was the greatest cause of his death. A minute later, there were only two heads left of the twin-headed snake and a pool of blood. Imo Han covered his mouth and rushed into the bathroom in the room. That scene was not only inappropriate for children, but it should also be censored in any situation. How could a person eat a 10-meter-long snake that weighed several tons in a minute? If one did not see it with their own eyes, they would definitely not be able to understand. Mohan was fortunate enough to see this terrifying scene with his own eyes. Are you done? Come out if you're done. This is just the appetizer. I'm not full yet. Hearing Chun Zhao's voice, Mohan immediately wiped his mouth and hurried out of the bathroom. Taoist, where are we going? Mr. and Mrs. Yi carried Xiao Yezi and followed the Taoist in fear. Stop. The Taoist suddenly waved his hand, signaling for them to stop. The Taoist's expression was extremely serious. Taoist, what's wrong? Mr. Yi did not notice anything wrong. Boundless heaven and earth, borrow the power of the universe, appear. The Taoist made a seal. The seal shot into the darkness and exploded into a ball of golden light. There was also a ball of dark matter in the golden light. The dark matter seemed to be impacted by the golden light and burst into countless black shadows. Each shadow was a ferocious evil spirit. They had been refined by an evil spell and were 100 times more ferocious than regular evil spirits. However, after being illuminated by the golden light, the evil spirits weakened greatly and did not dare to attack the Taoist directly. Come out, the Taoist yelled. Thud, thud, thud. Footsteps could be heard in the darkness. Soon, a figure in a tattered black robe walked out. A string of skulls hung on the person's body. The exposed limbs were thin and long. He was clearly not an ordinary person. The Taoist's pupils constricted. The black-robed person had a very famous name. Old Demon Black Mountain, although he was not the old Demon Black Mountain who kidnapped women in the movie. However, his reputation in the spiritual world was no less than that of the old Demon Black Mountain who kidnapped women. Moreover, this nickname in the spiritual world was hundreds of years earlier than the one in the movie. Maybe the old Demon Black Mountain in the movie was inspired by this person. The old Demon Black Mountain had done a lot of great things. Although they were all destroyed by righteous people, he was still free and unfettered. This alone was enough to show his strength. He was a great monster who had been running wild for 300 years. Fellow Taoist of Dragon Tiger Mountain, leave now, and I will pretend that you have never been here, the old Demon Black Mountain said in a deep voice. Wishful thinking. In that case, let's have a fight. The old Demon Black Mountain was also a straightforward person. Without saying much nonsense, black gas instantly surged out of his body. Each wisp of black gas was an evil spirit, and there were many ferocious evil spirits among them. There were at least tens of thousands of evil spirits. Of course, most of these evil spirits were not collected after the founding of the country. They were collected before the founding of the country. After all, too many people had died before the founding of the country. Almost every year, there would be a tragic battle. That was probably the happiest time for him. Of course, his happiness was based on the pain of countless people. In modern times, he could only pretend to be weak. Going against the country? Ha! Even a vicious and evil person like him could only bow down in the face of the power of a nation. Those who did not bow down were all killed. Today, I will kill the evil and defend the Tao. Chapter 2702. Thousand Ghosts Devour the Soul Go. The Witch of Black Mountain's means were not very special. Almost all of his methods were focused on the vile souls he had refined in the past. The method of attack was simple, but it was extremely effective. In an instant, countless evil spirits rushed towards the Taoist priest. Boundless heaven and earth, borrow the power of heaven and earth, swordsmanship, chi flowing clouds. The tip of the Taoist priest's sword slashed across his finger, causing a flower of blood to bloom. That flower of blood transformed into a dark golden sword of chi. The dark gold energy sword flashed with a sharp sword intent. The Taoist priest slashed horizontally, and when the dark golden energy sword swept past, it left behind a patch of golden runes. With a single move, countless evil spirits were annihilated. Today, I will destroy as many fierce souls as you come. I want to see how much magic power you have to use this move. Although the old demon of the Black Mountain was surprised by the Taoist's demon-slaying sword essence, he was afraid that even he would not be able to withstand the power of this sword. But it was also clear that although the demon's subduing sword intent was shocking, it consumed a lot of energy. In the past few hundred years, he had refined countless evil spirits and evil spirits. He was not afraid of exhausting the Taoist priest at all. The Taoist priest naturally knew his strengths and weaknesses. He did not want to compete with the Witch of Black Mountain in a battle of attrition. If they continued to fight, he was afraid that his disadvantage would be even greater. He hoped to attack the body of the Witch of Black Mountain. But he was a wise man, and the Witch of the Black Mountain was not stupid either. Naturally, he would not give the Taoist priest a chance to engage in close combat. He had been wandering around the edge of the battlefield. He controlled the evil spirits to attack the Taoist priest and the 3 members of the Yi family at the same time. In this way, they could restrain the Taoist priest so that he could not break through the siege. From time to time, he would return to help the 3 members of the Yi family. After a few rounds of attacks, the Taoist priest had already consumed 60% of his magic power. If he continued like this, he would probably run out of magic power in another 10 minutes. However, he didn't have any better ideas at the moment. If he was alone, he could come and go as he pleased. He could attack or defend as he pleased. But now, with the addition of 3 people from the Yi clan, he was being controlled in all aspects. At this moment, a few auras came from behind. The Witch of the Black Mountain and the Taoist almost sensed the auras at the same time. The Witch of Black Mountain burst out laughing. "Ha! Smelly cow nose, your end is here." They were naturally the same kind of the old demon of the Black Mountain, also demons under the command of the old demon Kunlai. The Taoist priest's face darkened. He was already at a disadvantage. Now that a few more demons had arrived, the situation he was facing was even more dangerous. This Oxnose actually runs so fast. Luckily, first Uncle Black Mountain stopped me. Otherwise, I would have ruined old ancestors' plans. Thank you for your help, Master Black Mountain. Cut the crap. I'll be the main attacker. You guys stay on the sidelines and look for an opportunity to attack this Oxnose. The deployment of the Witch of the Black Mountain did not hide from the Taoist priest at all. He didn't need to be secretive. The current situation was advantageous to them. He could easily deal with the Taoist priest. As long as they kill this Taoist priest, the life and death of the 3 Yi family members will be decided by them. Beads of perspiration appeared on the Taoist priest's forehead. He knew that the odds were against him. As for abandoning the 3 Yi family members and running away, he could do it. But for cultivators, cultivating the heart was the most important thing. If he abandoned the 3 members of a Yi clan, he was afraid that his cultivation would be crippled. What's more, this was an order from his master, Zhang Tianyi. It was even more impossible for him to abandon them and run away alone. The few monsters surrounded the Taoist priest and did not attack. They were waiting for him to reveal a flaw. The Taoist priest became more cautious. As his magic power was drained, he gradually felt tired. Suddenly, a monster revealed a strange expression. The Taoist priest's heart tightened. That monster is going to attack. In the next moment, the monster suddenly shouted, "Master Black Mountain, there are others." Before the monster finished speaking, his body suddenly seemed to be grabbed by something. His body suddenly pulled back and disappeared into the darkness. The monster's voice came from the dark forest. However, it was an extremely tragic cry. What? There are other people nearby? The Witch of the Black Mountain and the other monsters could not help but be shocked. The Taoist priest was surprised. There were people from his side lying in ambush nearby. Or was it the tracks of the monsters? So that he would let his guard down? The Taoist priest did not dare to be careless. After all, the current situation was unclear. However, at this moment, another monster was instantly pulled into the darkness. It was as if there was a pair of invisible hands secretly controlling everything. No. Apart from the screams, there was nothing else. Then, the Taoist priest smelled a strong smell of blood. There was also a demonic aura in the smell of blood. It was obvious that the two monsters had met a tragic end. Just as everyone was shocked, the two monsters were pulled into the darkness at the same time. What are you? Ah, it was too fast. The Taoist priest's expression was solemn. Who was it? Or rather, what was it? None of the demons were weak. Even the Taoist priest would need some effort to defeat them. It was almost impossible to kill them in a short period of time. Who was the one secretly attacking them? Also, such a strong smell of blood was completely abnormal. Who is it? Get the hell out here. The Witch of the Black Mountain was furious and roared angrily. However, the surroundings were still dark and deep. There was no aura at all. Only the strong smell of blood reminded him. There was someone more ferocious than them hiding in the darkness. Master Black Mountain, save me. Other than the Witch of the Black Mountain, the last monster was dragged into the darkness. Gulp! In just a few seconds, the ugly head of the monster rolled out of the darkness. At this time, the Witch of the Black Mountain could not stay calm. Right under his nose, several of his companions were plotted against and killed. The other party was definitely not weak. In fact, he was even stronger than him. Then he looked at the Taoist priest in front of him. The Witch of the Black Mountain snorted coldly. What a hypocritical ox nose. How dare you be so despicable and shameless? I will let you go today. I will settle the score with you next time. The Witch of the Black Mountain was very rational. A Taoist priest was enough to fight against him. In addition, there was an enemy whose strength was unknown and who was hiding in the dark. If the other party attacked him at the same time, he would most likely be left here. Therefore, he wisely chose to retreat for the time being. However, at this moment, the Witch of the Black Mountain suddenly felt an invisible force binding his body. Hey, disperse! The Witch of the Black Mountain shouted. Countless evil spirits and ferocious souls broke through his body, but the force did not dissipate. Instead, its strength increased greatly. Senior, I will retreat now. Please let me go, the Witch of the Black Mountain shouted. However, the person in the darkness did not intend to let him go at all. In the next moment, the body of the Witch of the Black Mountain was directly pulled into the darkness. Who are you? Ah, the voice of the Witch of the Black Mountain came from the darkness. The Taoist priest's scalp went numb. Who was that person? Was it someone arranged by Master in advance? But why didn't that person come out? He didn't even say hello. Divine Emperor of the Nine Heavens. Chapter 2703. The Taoist priest, Mr. and Mrs. Yi were all surprised. Mr. and Mrs. Yi thought that it was the Taoist priest arrangement. However, the Taoist priest was even more confused than them. When the first two monsters were dragged into the darkness, it could be said that the sneak attack was successful. But the monsters that were dragged into the darkness were all vigilant. Especially the old monster of Black Mountain. Almost all his energy was focused on defense. But he was still dragged into the darkness and was killed in an extremely short period of time. This made him extremely panicked. If all this was not a trick of the monsters, then it meant that there was an extremely terrifying existence nearby. The Taoist priest took a deep breath and said, May I ask which senior is coming? This junior is Xianzheng of Dragon Tiger Mountain, Celestial Master Sect. Xianzheng's Taoist name looked like a monk's Buddhist name. In fact, Xianzheng was considered a proper Taoist name in Taoism. However, Xianzheng waited for a long time, but there was no response from the darkness. Xianzheng hesitated for a long time and said, Thank you for your help, Senior. I still have something to do. I will pay my respects to Senior another day. Goodbye. It was not suitable to stay here for a long time. After all, the old monster Kunlai was nearby. After killing the young one, the old one would come soon. Therefore, Xianzheng could not waste any time here at the moment. If the old monster Kunlai came, then he really could not leave. Let's go. Xianzheng turned around and said, at the same time leading the way. Although Mr. and Mrs. Yi and Xiao Yezi were afraid, they had no better way at the moment. They could only follow behind Xianzheng. Only Xiao Yezi kept looking into the darkness. He seemed to have seen something. Xiao Yezi, what are you looking at? The uncle in the forest, he ate those monsters. Xianzheng's face changed slightly. He knew the identity of Xiao Yezi. He was found by his master, the future foundation of Dragon Tiger Mountain Celestial Master Sect. His talent could be said to be unique throughout the ages, a living one, and the only one with a 1,000-year bloodline to succeed. So if he saw something that he could not see, Xianzheng could only choose to believe it. However, Xianzheng felt that his scalp was a little numb. Did you just see the man in the forest eat those monsters? Well, that uncle is so scary. Xiao Yezi wrapped her arms around Mr. Ye's neck and unconsciously shrunk. Taoist Xianzheng, on the other hand, felt that only demons would eat demons, not humans. Even if Xiao Yezi saw a human, she would only think that it was a demon in human form. Humans don't eat monsters. After all, demons were covered in demonic aura. Don't be afraid of being turned into a half-demon. Just enter. Humans could really turn into demons. In the eyes of Taoist priest Xianzheng, the man hiding in the dark. No matter what their identities were, since he ate monsters, then he was either a monster to begin with, or he had already become a monster. Taoist priest Xianzheng's footsteps became faster. He also cast a cool breeze incantation on the Yi couple, adding a speed buff. In just 10 minutes, Taoist priest Xianzheng had already brought the family of 3 to run more than 10 kilometers. But at that moment, the dark clouds in the sky suddenly spread over, followed by a black cloud descending from the sky. The black clouds were like a passageway connecting heaven and earth. But within the black clouds, there was an indescribable pressure. If possible, what Taoist priest Xianzheng wanted to do the most now was to injure the Yi family and turn around to leave. But he knew that he couldn't do it, because within the black clouds, old Monster Kunlai's figure had already appeared. It was a 1,000-year-old demon that seemed old, but it was a chilling 1,000-year-old demon. Taoist priest Xianzheng didn't say anything, and the dark gold chi sword moved. Taoist priest Xianzheng directly used a big move, and it was the big move that he didn't use against old Monster Black Mountain. In an instant, more than 10 dark gold chi swords hung above his head. Taoist priest Xianzheng shouted, "Sky sword demon subduing!" Slash! Old Monster Kunlai opened his turbid eyes. Not bad, Junior. Back then, I suffered this attack from Zhang Tianyi. Unfortunately, you aren't Zhang Tianyi. After saying that, old Monster Kunlai raised the wooden staff in his hand, and the same move as Taoist priest Xianzheng appeared around him. But old Monster Kunlai's move could instantly condense hundreds of dark gold chi swords. Taoist priest Xianzheng's ultimate move didn't even get close to old Monster Kunlai before it was swallowed by the black clouds surrounding old Monster Kunlai. It didn't even create any sound or light effects. It could be said that it was a huge loss. He had already fought with old Monster Black Mountain and used up 70% to 80% of his magic power. Although he recovered a bit of magic power now, but he still wasn't at his peak. Now he used all his magic power on his big move. On the other hand, old Monster Kunlai, his 1,000-year magic power wasn't a joke. He was the existence with the highest cultivation in this world. Even Zhang Tianyi was just a little brother in front of old Monster Kunlai. Old Monster Kunlai was planning to fight back against Taoist priest Xianzheng. Suddenly, old Monster Kunlai stopped. Old Monster Kunlai's gaze suddenly shot towards the darkness. In an instant, his gaze became sharp and cold. Who's there? Come out. Taoist priest Xianzheng's heart jumped. Could it be that monster that ate his own kind? If he came, maybe under his control, he would have a chance to escape. Old Monster Kunlai's gaze turned serious. Humph. Since you've been discovered, you still don't want to come out? After saying that, old Monster Kunlai suddenly waved the wooden staff in his hand. A yellow dragon dashed out from the staff and shot towards the darkness. The yellow dragon, formed by huge magic power, galloped for hundreds of meters in the darkness. Suddenly, there was a loud sound. Following, it was a devastating shockwave. If Taoist priest Xianzheng hadn't protected the family of 3, this shockwave would probably have sent the entire Yi family to reincarnation. Taoist priest Xianzheng's face was also pale. Old Monster Kunlai's casual attack had such terrifying power. He couldn't even take this attack. Just the power of the shock wave at the edge would probably vaporize him. Just then, two figures gradually appeared in the center of the explosion. Taoist priest Xian Zheng's pupils constricted. Just these two people? No, more accurately, these two suspected monsters? Mr. Chun? Mr. Yi recognized him immediately. The figure standing in front was Chun Zhao. The person behind him was Mo Han, who seemed to owe Chun Zhao money. Kunlai's face was filled with disdain as he looked at Chun Zhao strolling over. Your old monster Zhang's chess piece, right? You don't look like much. Chun Zhao swept the dust off his body and walked before old monster Kunlai. You better fight me with your real body, Chun Zhao said calmly. You can't even take one slap from me in this old man form. Mo Han looked at Chun Zhao deeply. He didn't say anything. His gaze was enough. Chapter 2704. Arrogant. Old monster Kunlai shouted. Actually, it wasn't just Kunlai who wanted to say this. Even Taoist Xianzheng and the Yi couple behind him wanted to say it. The couple had seen with their own eyes that Taoist Xianzheng's full-powered attack wasn't even 1/10 of Kunlai's casual attack. The gap between them was immeasurable. Old monster Kunlai's yellow dragon rush just now. The sound and light effects were enough to show how terrifying he was. Of course, what the Yi couple saw was only the surface. But as a professional, Taoist Xianzheng could sense Kunlai's power. He was basically a monster. The entire space was filled with Kunlai's demonic aura. In terms of quantity, this old monster's power was probably 1,000 times his. Even Zhang Tianyi wouldn't dare to say something like, "Come with your real body." Kunlai wouldn't tell Zhang Tianyi how awesome he was just by opening his mouth. Old monster Kunlai waved his cane. The wooden cane suddenly grew bigger, turning into a terrifying snake that swooped down on Chun Zhao's head. Seeing this, Taoist Xianzheng's expression couldn't help but change. That was because the demonic snake formed from the wooden staff itself was a great demon with a terrifying cultivation. Kunlai had probably used some demonic method to refine it into a half-monster, half-magic weapon. Only half of the snake's body was revealed. The other half was still connected to the staff. Even though it was only half of its body, it was already incomparably huge. The snake's mouth alone was 10 meters wide. It covered the sky and covered Chun Zhao. But he saw that Chun Zhao stood where he was as if nothing had happened. He didn't plan to dodge or block at all. He felt that as a teammate on the same side. He really had to remind Chun Zhao. Chun Zhao just waved casually. Whoosh! The splattered flesh and blood painted a horrifying canvas on the ground. Kunlai took a step back and looked at the staff that had lost its spiritual chi. His face darkened, and he casually tossed the useless staff away. Not bad. You do have some ability. Old monster Kunlai's eyes flashed with a hint of darkness. Since you destroyed my hollow staff, I'll refine you into a human weapon. I believe you won't have any objections. Chun Zhao's eyes were cold. Hurry up. I'm not full tonight. Kunlai did not like Chun Zhao's gaze. He did not know what that gaze meant. But that kind of gaze made him uncomfortable. As long as it was a gaze that made him uncomfortable, he would never be stingy in giving it death, or a deterrence that was even more terrifying than death. You like to act gloomy in front of this old man? Then I'll let you experience the coldest thing in the world. Old monster Kunlai grabbed the air, and a gloomy azure ball of air was caught in his hand. Go, dodge. That's the soul-devouring netherfire. Xianzheng didn't even have time to marvel at how Chun Zhao destroyed Kunlai's staff with one strike before he hurriedly warned Chun Zhao. The soul-devouring underworld fire wasn't something living beings could touch. Just as the name implied, this nether flame used soul power as fuel. As long as the soul was not burnt to ashes, the soul-devouring nether fire would not be extinguished. Hiss! Chun Zhao sucked in a deep breath. He directly sucked the soul-devouring nether fire into his stomach. Then it flowed through his meridians to the rest of his body. Then the nirvana flame would burn automatically. That was it. To Chun Zhao, it tasted good. The soul-devouring nether fire contained Kunlai's immense power. It could only be said that Kunlai really suited Chun Zhao's taste. Chun Zhao's gaze toward Kunlai became even more passionate, other than the fact that he could not eat in his human form. Everything about old monster Kunlai made Chun Zhao feel a primitive desire. Eat him. Kunlai could feel Chun Zhao's even more passionate or even sick gaze. What was Chun Zhao after? The only person present who could understand the meaning of Chun Zhao's passionate gaze was probably Mo Han. Kunlai snorted coldly. The terrifying aura on his body became even stronger. Put away your disgusting gaze. Xianzheng suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. This old monster's strength was so terrifying that it made one's hair stand on end. Just his pressure could heavily injure him. How did his master win against such a monster back then? And it wasn't just once. Chun Zhao could suppress the old monster every time. Kunlai finally couldn't help but attack for the third time. Chun Zhao's gaze was too evil. Even an experienced person like Kunlai could not take it. It was true. The human's gaze was really poisonous. The longer he was stared at, the more panicked Kunlai became. Insolent one die. Old monster Kunlai was truly enraged. Old monster Kunlai raised his arms with all his might. Behind him, terrifying black smoke began to surge. That black smoke was not some kind of spell, but real magic power. Xianzheng's eyes almost popped out. Mana. That was magic power that could be materialized. Just how much magic power was needed to materialize it into reality? In reality, Xianzheng had underestimated Kunlai. The black smoke he saw was not the entirety of old freak Kunlai's power. The black cloud that covered the sky was all of Kunlai's mana. However, even though his magic power was terrifying and boundless, even if Chun Zhao and Zhang Tianyi combined their mana, they wouldn't even be 1/10 of Kunlai's. But his killing moves were really uncreative. He'd probably spent all his time gathering mana in the past 1,000 years. There were pros and cons to this method of increasing power. The advantage was that almost no one could outlast him. Yes, no one could outlast him. But more importantly, his combat ability was really not strong. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been beaten up by Zhang Tianyi, who didn't even have 1/10 of his mana. The black cloud of mana behind Kunlai started flashing with white light. It was extremely terrifying lightning. Lightning that was born from magical power. It was even more terrifying than natural lightning. Boom! Thousands of lightning bolts landed on Chun Zhao. He was so angry that he laughed. This was too disrespectful. Apart from the first time being a little more serious, it felt like he was supporting the enemy. The lightning that landed on Chun Zhao made him feel refreshed all over. It was like he had a hangover and suddenly felt refreshed. It was as if he had a hangover and suddenly felt refreshed, as if he had just killed a chicken. In the eyes of Taoist priest Xianzheng, this move was almost enough to destroy the world. But to Chun Zhao, it was nothing. Whether it was him or Zhang Tianyi, this kind of power was normal. They could throw out 8 or 10 in a second with their eyes closed. Chun Zhao even suspected that Kunlai could last a dozen rounds against Zhang Tianyi, because Zhang Tianyi wanted him to nurture his 1,000-year bloodline, and he didn't want to dirty his hands. When the fruit was ripe, he would harvest it himself. Thinking of this, Chun Zhao felt like he'd been tricked by Zhang Tianyi. Chapter 2705. It was a terrifying lightning bolt that felt like the world was going to shatter. Under everyone's shocked gazes, Chun Zhao stood where he was, unharmed. After absorbing the lightning, Chun Zhao's body was still flashing with electric arcs. Kunlai's expression was the most serious. That was the strongest killing move he could use in his human form. But Chun Zhao was still unharmed. Seems like I've underestimated the heroes of the world. Chun Zhao didn't want to say much. After all, no one wanted to talk to food. But when these words came out of old monster Kunlai's mouth, it felt awkward. You don't have the right to say that. Chun Zhao's attitude was quite disdainful. You have one last chance. Use your real body to fight me. Otherwise, you can die now. Ha! I haven't appeared in the world for so many years. I've just left Kunlai Mountain, and I've already encountered such an arrogant human kid. Seems like if I don't get serious today, I'll really be underestimated. Just then, the black cloud turned into a cloud pillar and descended from the sky. It kept surging into Kunlai's back. It wasn't an immediate change. Instead, it was a long process. With every passing second, old monster Kunlai's aura became more terrifying. Taoist Xianzheng felt like his scalp was going to explode. Previously, when old monster Kunlai used his full strength, he thought that was old monster Kunlai's full strength. But he realized he was wrong. Old monster Kunlai was getting stronger with every passing second. It was as if he had no limit. Right now, Kunlai was like a super scion. His chi kept bursting outwards. At the same time, he kept absorbing his main body's mana. Finally, the black cloud in the sky disappeared completely. But Kunlai's main body, which was hidden in the black cloud, also revealed itself. It was a 1,000-meter long, bat-like beast. It was completely black. The giant beast suddenly fell down, but every time it fell, its body would shrink a little. When it landed on Kunlai's head, it was less than 2 meters tall. Then, Kunlai's main body pounced on Kunlai. The two merged into one in a short time. Instantly, a terrifying aura storm rose from Kunlai's body. Kunlai's body also turned into a beast. It wasn't as huge as before, but it was even more terrifying. Kunlai's real body opened its mouth, and a murky black gas sprayed at Chun Zhao. Chun Zhao, who was about to fall asleep, suddenly opened his eyes wide. Chun Zhao inhaled the murky black gas that rushed toward him. "Junior, do you know that's chaotic chi? You're dead meat." Chun Zhao couldn't be bothered to explain to Kunlai just how awesome he was. At the moment, Chun Zhao's eyes were already shining with endless heat. Old monster Kunlai frowned. He originally wanted to explain how terrifying the chaotic energy was. He used the origin of the chaotic energy and its status in the myths to increase his own style. However, the person on the other side didn't seem to be listening. He was drooling. He's looking at me like I'm food. Audacious. Old monster Kunlai roared. But at that moment, Chun Zhao, who had been silent all this time, suddenly moved. This was the first time he took the initiative to move. Bang! Chun Zhao rammed his head into it. Kunlai's enormous body was sent flying by Chun Zhao. The next moment, Chun Zhao was already standing on Kunlai's abdomen. "You do have some ability. No wonder old Zhang treated you as a hidden pawn." Kunlai clearly didn't realize the severity of the problem. He was still being stepped on by Chun Zhao. Kunlai wanted to flip over, but realized that he couldn't. At the moment, Chun Zhao had gone all out. Not to fight. It was to eat old monster Kunlai. Chun Zhao pounced on Kunlai's abdomen and bit down. Then, he used the terrifying power of the small world to compress Kunlai's flesh and blood, and then sucked it into his mouth. Under normal circumstances, even if Chun Zhao's appetite was insane, he wouldn't be able to swallow a giant monster in a short time. But with this method, no matter how big the monster was, Chun Zhao could eat it as a dish to go with wine. The terrifying magic power, accompanied by the sputtering of blood, soared several meters high. Kunlai howled in pain. "Crazy, what are you doing?" But right now, Chun Zhao's consciousness was mostly taken over by his appetite. That mouthful was filled with dense magic power. It was a sense of satisfaction he'd never felt before. Kunlai tried to resist, but Chun Zhao's punch landed on his body. Kunlai's skin was about to crack. Even the ground behind him was torn apart. "Don't disturb me when I'm eating." Right now, Chun Zhao was covered in blood. Then, he looked like a monster who was possessed. Even old monster Kunlai was terrified. Of course, the main reason was Chun Zhao's terrifying style and strength. He wasn't joking or scaring him. He really wanted to eat him. His gaze earlier and the few times he wanted him to show his true form. It was because he'd wanted to eat him back then. From the start to the end, he'd treated him as food. In the past, only he ate people. No one dared to eat him. But today, he'd really met one. Not only did he dare to think about it, he even dared to act on it. Chun Zhao's actions didn't just scare old monster Kunlai. Even Taoist priest Xianzheng and the 3 members of the Yi family were frightened. Comparing Kunlai and Chun Zhao was clearly more terrifying. He was more like a monster. Although he had the appearance of a human, his actions were more savage than a monster's. Kunlai struggled and resisted crazily. But most of the time, Chun Zhao didn't care. It was as if Kunlai's resistance didn't conflict with his eating. Luckily, Kunlai's vitality was strong. If it was someone else, Chun Zhao's few bites would probably kill him on the spot. When Chun Zhao ate, he was rather wild. It could basically be used as a close-up shot in a monster horror movie. Chun Zhao grabbed Kun Lai's internal alchemy. Taoist Xian Zheng's pupils constricted. Chun Zhao actually opened his mouth and bit down. Then, there were crunching sounds. Chun Zhao's aura also became extremely turbid. Kun Lai was still full of energy, howling and roaring. "Give it back! Give it back! That belongs to me!" Chun Zhao grabbed Kun Lai's internal alchemy with one hand and looked down at the old monster. "Still alive? That's good. Living things taste better." Kun Lai had lived for thousands of years, but he'd never seen such a terrifying person. Was he even human? Even the demons hadn't seen such a crazy person, right? Even with the Kunpeng bloodline, he didn't dare to devour demons. This was because any demon race that focused on devouring would basically end up in a state of delirium. Chapter 2706. Burp. Chun Zhao burped. This was after he got the 9 viscera techniques. It was the first time he felt full. But this didn't mean he couldn't eat. Chun Zhao didn't devour Kun Lai's dermic power. To be honest, Kun Lai's power was unparalleled in the world. But to Chun Zhao, it was like a dish. Someone else's power belonged to someone else. Just like when Chun Zhao devoured magical beasts, he would have some symptoms, such as magic allergy. If Chun Zhao took Kun Lai's power for himself, the symptoms would probably make Chun Zhao want to die. What Chun Zhao needed was the spirituality in Kun Lai's flesh and blood. Just like when Kun Lai devoured others, he needed the sliver of spirituality in the body. It was the same logic, but today, he was being devoured. Chun Zhao devoured Kun Lai's internal alchemy completely. The spiritual energy made Chun Zhao feel delicious. He was even infatuated with this feeling. Kun Lai stared at Chun Zhao hatefully. But other than being pressed to the ground and glaring at Chun Zhao furiously, he couldn't do anything. Chun Zhao looked down at Kun Lai. Expressionlessly, he raised his arm and slapped down. The moment Kun Lai's body collapsed, a huge wave of demonic aura surged out. At the same time, an illusory figure charged out of the body. Kun Lai was preparing for his last struggle. Even if his cultivation was destroyed, even if his body collapsed, as long as his soul escaped, he still had a chance to cultivate his body again. But Chun Zhao wouldn't give him this chance. The mouth of gluttony opened. The terrifying mouth covered Kun Lai's soul. "No!" Kun Lai let out a sorrowful howl. The next moment, what welcomed him was endless darkness. Kun Lai's soul was torn apart by the mouth of gluttony. The soul fragments were absorbed by Chun Zhao. Chun Zhao raised an eyebrow. He found some unusual memories in Kun Lai's soul fragments. It was Kun Lai's cultivation method. It was different from Chun Zhao's own cultivation method. It wasn't from Taoism either, using the Taiyin and Taiyang Qi to combine to create chaotic energy. Then, using the chaotic energy to purify the internal sea, opening up an internal world. However, this primal chaos Qi was extremely dangerous to both the enemy and the user. Tempering the inner sea was also extremely painful. Even old monster Kun Lai, who possessed the Kunpeng bloodline, could not endure this kind of cultivation method. Therefore, he found another way to fuse the chaos Qi into his own little world and refine the little world, allowing the little world's magic power to reach an astonishing level. This was also why Chun Zhao and Zhang Tianyi's combined power was less than 1/10 of Kun Lai's. However, although this kind of shortcut could allow one to obtain an astonishing amount of magic power and cultivation base, it was not enough. But in the end, he didn't have any battle power. Chun Zhao could even imagine how hard Zhang Tianyi had to pretend to be on par with Kun Lai every time they fought. Of course, this was just a fleeting thought. Chun Zhao was more concerned about this method of training and what the inner world would be like. Chun Zhao had never heard of an inner world. Perhaps he could ask Zhang Tianyi. Chun Zhao glanced at the Taoist priest. Xianzhen's scalp went numb under Chun Zhao's gaze. It wasn't that he was timid, but that Chun Zhao's previous performance was too terrifying. He was simply a demon. Chun Zhao's gaze landed on the Yi family. The Yi couple was also creeped out by Chun Zhao's gaze. However, Chun Zhao didn't plan to make things difficult for them. Actually, the three of them were innocent. Even if Xiao Yezi was sinful, it had nothing to do with him. Old Mo, let's go. Chun Zhao retracted his gaze and disappeared into the darkness. Imohan hurriedly followed Chun Zhao and disappeared into the darkness together. Imohan followed closely behind Chun Zhao. He was secretly observing Chun Zhao's expression. At the moment, Chun Zhao's aura was restrained, but his eyes were full of vitality. Mr. Chun, the spell on your body. Chun Zhao glanced at Imohan casually. It's gone. Chun Zhao could feel that the 9 viscera techniques that he had been afflicted with had been removed. Then Imohan's heart jumped. At this moment, it was really a moment of life and death for him. His life was in Chun Zhao's hands. Chun Zhao stopped and looked at Imohan. Imohan felt his hands and feet turn cold. With Chun Zhao's ferocity, it wouldn't be strange if he killed him. What do you think I should do with you? Imohan lowered his head, not daring to answer. Okay, I'm in a good mood. I forgive you. Imohan suddenly raised his head, widened his eyes, and looked at Chun Zhao in disbelief. Is this a joke? Chun Zhao was the most vicious person he had ever seen. Imohan wouldn't be surprised if Chun Zhao dared to do anything cruel. But Chun Zhao actually said that he would forgive him. He wasn't being sarcastic, was he? Be my dog for 10 years, Chun Zhao said calmly. Imohan heard Chun Zhao's words. His first reaction wasn't to refuse or negotiate with Chun Zhao. Instead, he heaved a sigh of relief. I won't be in the country for a long time. In the future, help me take care of my domestic affairs. Okay, Mr. Chun. No, boss. Chun Zhao felt his body. He finally found this feeling. After being afflicted with the 9 viscera techniques, his combat power was stronger than normal. But Chun Zhao didn't like that feeling. It was the feeling that he might lose control at any time. It was as if he had to fight with that violent desire for control of his body at any time. No one knew when desire would overcome reason. At the moment, Chun Zhao was relaxed. It felt good. Just then, an ignorant monster charged before Chun Zhao. Chun Zhao didn't attack. He just looked at the powerful monster indifferently. The monster clearly hadn't figured out his position in the situation. He arrogantly expressed that he wanted to discuss Chinese cuisine with Chun Zhao. Boss, do you want to pack it? Imohan asked. Or eat it as supper? He quickly accepted his new identity, and at the same time, carried out the tasks of his new identity well. No, I don't have an appetite anymore. Chun Zhao shook his head. As expected, it was impossible for a human to swallow that bloody flesh. Chun Zhao had also swallowed those dark creatures in the past, but he only swallowed them with dark lava. I'll leave this to you. I'm going to Jingxin Villa to take a look. Jingxin Villa still didn't know what had happened to Kunlai. The demons under his command were still fighting against the people of Jingxin Villa. Jingxin Villa was clearly at a disadvantage. The only thing they could barely hold on was that the demons didn't dare to attack at full force. Their mission was only to stall the people of Jingxin Villa. Of course, on this basis, it was also acceptable to do a few more dirty tricks to the people of Jingxin Manor. Chun Zhao arrived outside Jingxin Villa and saw the battle at the gate from afar. More than 10 people of Jingxin Villa were fighting fiercely against the demons. But then, Chun Zhao looked up at the sky. Chapter 2707. The black clouds that should have dispersed shrouded the sky again. But this time, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Electric snakes surged in the clouds. The lightning was terrifying, as if it was the end of the world. Apart from a loud boom, each bolt illuminated the world. The next moment, a bolt of lightning landed on the battlefield. A huge monster's true body was instantly roasted by the lightning. Everyone on the battlefield stopped fighting in an instant. They all stared in shock at the burnt demon's true body. Then, a godlike figure descended from the sky. Zhang Tianyi. He's here, with anger and coldness. The moment Zhang Tianyi appeared, the morale and situation on both sides reversed. You! Damn it! Just then, dozens of cultivators jumped out from the walls of Jingxin Villa. They were all guests of Jingxin Villa. Before this, they'd actually been observing the situation, or rather, watching the show. They could tell that the monsters weren't here to kill. They were only here to stall for time, so they weren't worried about being caught in the crossfire. But it was different now. Zhang Tianyi was here. Most of them didn't know that Jingxin Villa belonged to Zhang Tianyi. But this didn't stop them from making the right judgment. If they still hid now, they'd be making Zhang Tianyi unhappy. Plus, if they performed well, they might catch Zhang Tianyi's attention. Then, he'd give them a small reward. Wouldn't that be great? But Chun Zhao, who was also a bystander, couldn't help but sneer. Kunlai was stupid, but he called Zhang Tianyi the right way. He was a shrewd, old ghost. Right now, Zhang Tianyi looked like he couldn't restrain his anger. In reality, he'd been here for a long time. Or maybe he hadn't just been here. He'd been hiding nearby all along. Just then, Zhang Tianyi's gaze fell into the darkness. The place he was looking at was where Chun Zhao was standing. Chun Zhao and Zhang Tianyi exchanged a look as if they were very experienced. Chun Zhao didn't plan on exposing Zhang Tianyi's true treachery. Of course, Zhang Tianyi didn't plan on revealing certain truths either. For example, Kunlai's death. He was happy to accept the honor of killing Kunlai. The moment Zhang Tian appeared, those demons were scared out of their wits. Their boss, Kunlai, was nowhere to be found. Under such circumstances, their morale had already hit rock bottom. Many demons wanted to escape. A small portion of them were unable to escape. There were even more timid demons that were so frightened that they prostrated themselves on the ground and begged for mercy. Chun Zhao returned to his room. Not long after, Imohan also returned. Boss, the Yi family was taken away by the people from Dragon Tiger Mountain. Imohan said, "It's expected." Chun Zhao shrugged. He wasn't surprised at all. What's within expectations? Just then, Zhang Tianyi's voice came from outside. Chun Zhao had no elegance at all. He slumped on the sofa and put his feet on the table. What do you think? Looks like even without me, old monster Kunlai would only be helping your Mount Longhu. You've misunderstood. Misunderstanding? That old monster Kunlai is so weak. Among my opponents, he can barely be ranked in the top 10. You're telling me that you fought with him for more than 10 rounds and didn't manage to kill him? Who are you trying to fool? Fine, I admit it, Zhang Tianyi admitted honestly. It's not hard to kill him. So you're just fooling me. Not really. That's not it. In the first few rounds, I was only in the Shangqing state. You saw how powerful that old monster was, so I was only evenly matched with him at first. Later on, we fought a few more times. He escaped quickly. Although it wasn't difficult to win, it wasn't easy to kill him. It wasn't until recently that I found out about his plan that I started to think about it. Zhang Tianyi glanced at Chun Zhao. You didn't lose anything either. You're full of energy now, and the haze on your face is gone. Looks like you've indeed removed the 9 viscera techniques. Chun Zhao suddenly grinned. Not only did I not lose anything, I even gained something. Zhang Tianyi raised an eyebrow. If Chun Zhao said he'd gained something, then he must have gotten something amazing. Thinking about it, what did old monster Kunlai have that caught Chun Zhao's attention? His pure flesh and blood? That thing was indeed very nutritious. For normal people or cultivators, just a little would cause them to turn into monsters. But for them, no matter how much there was, they would eat it for you to see. At their level, they were almost invincible. So, the flesh and blood with thick demonic aura was really nothing. But what could the flesh and blood give Chun Zhao? To increase his own spiritual power? With their cultivation level, the amount of spiritual power didn't mean much. Let's compare old monster Kunlai. His spiritual power was strong enough, right? Chun Zhao still pressed him to the ground and rubbed him. Or did it increase the strength of Chun Zhao's body? Although old monster Kunlai's flesh and blood were pure, Zhang Tianyi believed it could increase Chun Zhao's strength. But the increase would definitely be very limited. Chun Zhao's body was already close to perfection. Even if old monster Kunlai gave Chun Zhao 10 portions, he probably wouldn't have any qualitative changes. So, The gains Chen Zhao was talking about were definitely not Kunlai's flesh and blood. Could it be that old monster Kunlai had some other treasures that he didn't know? The more Zhang Tianyi thought about it, the more he felt like he had lost out. If he had known, he would have done it himself. Chen Zhao, do you think you can share some with me? Everyone who sees it has a share, Zhang Tianyi said shamelessly. Huh? Chen Zhao chuckled at Zhang Tianyi. Do you know what an inner world is? Zhang Tianyi's expression changed slightly. Yes, why do you ask? I got old monster Kunlai's cultivation technique, and it's for cultivating an inner world. Impossible. If old monster Kunlai cultivated an inner world, could you kill him so easily? I don't believe it. He didn't cultivate an inner world. He just modified his technique and took a shortcut. Chen Zhao shrugged. You still haven't told me what an inner world is. In fact, whether it's you or me, or even the 23rd generation Blood Mary and Bifla, the path we've taken is flawed. The small world we've cultivated is also known as the outer world, but we haven't cultivated the inner world. In fact, you don't even know about the inner world. Only our sect of Dragon Tiger Mountain has some relevant records, but they're only records, and they're not detailed enough. Cultivating the outer world allows one to see the gods and understand the mysterious world, while cultivating the inner world allows one to comprehend the heaven and earth, and even master the Great Tao. Great Path? What's that? The Great Path is what our ancestors called it. Now, people call it the natural laws. Chapter 2708. Chen Zhao planned to share the cultivation method of his inner world. Of course, it was only limited to Zhang Tianyi, Bifla, and the 23rd Blood Mary. But before that, Chen Zhao wanted to collect some interest. In other words, the method of cultivating the inner world that I have now is an isolated version, right? Zhang Tianyi's smile froze. Tell me, what do you want? The primordial bell you used last time seems to be very suitable for me. It's the method I want to cultivate, Chen Zhao said with a bright smile. Zhang Tianyi's face darkened. Fuck, he'd used that move to block Chen Zhao's attack. Now he was asking for that move. Your fleshly body is definitely harder than my primordial chaos great bell. Why do you need my primordial chaos great bell? How about I give you a few practical spells? They can directly increase your combat ability and increase your strength. How about that? Zhang Tianyi was speaking the truth. Chen Zhao definitely didn't want the primordial bell to protect himself in battle. In his past battles, he'd basically won by charging head-on. Thus, the primordial bell was meaningless to Chen Zhao. His intention for the primordial bell was obvious. He wanted to find the bell's weakness and beat himself up. Zhang Tianyi could already imagine what kind of scene that would be. If you're willing to give me a few more spells, of course, I'd be happy to accept. But I still want the cultivation method of the primordial bell. This condition can't be changed. Don't you have a more professional and excellent team? You can ask them to give you ideas. No, I want the primordial bell. Zhang Tianyi was very upset because Chen Zhao was still holding a grudge against him for the tie that day. This wasn't good news for him. It seemed that he had to develop a few practical skills. At least, he wouldn't be beaten up passively when facing Chen Zhao. But as the saying went, one with strength could defeat 10. In terms of combat ability, powerful strength would indeed make battles easier. For example, Chen Zhao. But Zhang Tianyi's combat ability wasn't displayed in battle. So, he would definitely be at a disadvantage when facing Chen Zhao head-on. Actually, Zhang Tianyi had really misunderstood Chen Zhao. Chen Zhao wasn't fighting Zhang Tianyi at all. Chen Zhao had been reflecting on himself after getting the 9 techniques of dirty arts. In the past, he had faced almost all spell attacks. Basically, I'll just stand there, and your spells will have to pass through my attributeless domain first. In the attributeless domain, 99% of the spells were worn down first. Then he used his invulnerable body to withstand it. With Chen Zhao's physical and magic resistance, the spells couldn't even break through his defense. Most of the time, this was very useful and effective. But if he were to encounter the 9 dirty spells next time, no matter how high his magic resistance was, he would directly give him a mental blow. Chun Zhao couldn't guarantee that there was only one dirty technique disciple in the world. Therefore, it was necessary to take precautions. To Chun Zhao, the primordial bell was an awesome defensive spell. At the very least, it could block his attacks. Chun Zhao felt that this was the best defensive spell in the world. In the past, Chun Zhao had seen many defensive spells that were said to be indestructible. For example, absolute isolation, holy barrier, and so on. To Chun Zhao, it was only one or two punches. Only those who could withstand his attacks would have an amazing defense. To be honest, Zhang Tianyi, Bifla, and 23rd Blood Mary. If he were to face Bifla and 23rd Blood Mary, Chun Zhao was confident that he could force his way through and win. But Zhang Tianyi couldn't. Chun Zhao had no confidence at all. That day, Zhang Tianyi had only been defending. What if he fought back? Chun Zhao had always believed in one thing. When the opponent couldn't kill you, you had many ways to do so. Therefore, Chun Zhao didn't doubt that he might not be able to beat Zhang Tianyi if the battle continued. Chun Zhao couldn't break through Zhang Tianyi's defense, so Zhang Tianyi was undefeatable. Because of this, Chun Zhao wanted the primordial bell. Let me think about it. Even if it was an inner world cultivation technique, Zhang Tianyi had to consider whether Chun Zhao would slap his old face if he handed over the primordial bell. Of course, the main reason was that the primordial bell technique contains some secrets of Dragon Tiger Mountain's Celestial Masters sect. Moreover, Chun Zhao didn't plan on taking out the inner world cultivation technique immediately. At the very least, they had to discuss and research together with Bifla and Blood Mary of the 23rd generation. Zhang Tianyi left in a hurry. He needed to see the future of Dragon Tiger Mountain, the 1,000-year bloodline. Zhang Tianyi estimated that he still had a few decades to live, but he definitely wouldn't be able to live until the spiritual Qi tide arrived. If he died, Dragon Tiger Mountain's Celestial Masters sect would have a gap of a few decades. It couldn't be helped. Dragon Tiger Mountain's Celestial Masters sect had many outstanding juniors. There were also many people who were called geniuses, but there was no one who could stand alone. At least, Zhang Tianyi only saw people like Chun Zhao, or maybe only those who were slightly weaker could stand alone. Therefore, Zhang Tianyi had a plan ahead. Also, Zhang Tianyi gave Chun Zhao a deadline before he left. The day after tomorrow. That was the deadline. That thing in the Qinling Mountains was about to appear. Chun Zhao didn't know why Zhang Tianyi was so insistent on letting him fight. Was it because he was familiar with him? Although Zhang Tianyi was a troublemaker most of the time, Chun Zhao believed that the old man would be smart at times. Chun Zhao didn't want to admit it, but Zhang Tianyi was indeed smart when it came to dealing with supernatural events. Comparatively speaking, Chun Zhao was a bit slow. Most of the time, Chun Zhao liked to solve problems with his fists. After thinking about it, Chun Zhao decided to go to Dragon Tiger Mountain's Celestial Masters sect and meet Zhang Tianyi. He wanted to find out what was hidden in the Qinling Mountains. Chun Zhao didn't believe that Zhang Tianyi couldn't solve it without him. There were really many capable people in China. For example, the Taoist nun from Mao Mountain perfected Qingping. Another example was the old Taoist priest who appeared with Zhang Ding when he first met him. They were all above the Shanqing state. They weren't the only ones in China's supernatural world. With just 3 to 5 of that level, they would basically be able to flatten any kind of demon or ghost. Why do they have to trick him back from abroad? The next day, Chun Zhao bought a ticket to Dragon Tiger Mountain. Of course, Imohan was going with him, Chun Zhao's domestic assistant and bodyguard. However, when he reached the foot of Dragon Tiger Mountain, Chun Zhao stopped. He didn't want to go up anymore. Chapter 2709. At the foot of Dragon Tiger Mountain, there was a large group of Taoists holding flags and banners. The banners said, "Welcome, Mr. Chun Zhao, to Dragon Tiger Mountain to exchange Taoist culture and promote long-term friendship." Then there was the sound of drums and firecrackers. Chun Zhao's steps wavered, his expression dazed. "Calm down. I have to calm down now." Suppressing his anger, Chun Zhao exhaled deeply. At this time, a 70 or 80-year-old Taoist walked towards Chun Zhao and Imohan. Chun Zhao didn't know if the old Taoist was someone important in Dragon Tiger Mountain. But he was a normal person. He wasn't an expert who pretended to be a normal person. He was just a normal person. Hello. May I ask who is Mr. Chun Zhao? I am. Chun Zhao had a fake smile. Who are you? Hello, Mr. Chun. I'm Zhang Xianqing, the 145th leader of Dragon Tiger Mountain's Celestial Masters sect. I'm also the chairman of the Taoist Culture Association. On behalf of the association, I thank you again for your great contribution to spreading and promoting Taoist culture. I don't understand. I understand that Mr. Chan wants to keep a low profile, Zhang Xianqing said. Chen Zhao still didn't understand what Zhang Xianqing was doing. Or what was Zhang Tianyi doing? Mr. Chun, when will the donation be delivered? Chen Zhao rubbed his forehead. As expected, Zhang Tianyi was tricking him. How much did I promise to donate? Or how much did someone promise me? 10 million yuan. Zhang Xuanqing's old face was almost blooming with a smile. Chen Zhao was so angry that his nose was crooked. 10 million yuan wasn't a lot. He could earn it by sleeping at home. However, Chen Zhao really didn't want to pay 10 million yuan. Seeing so many people's gazes, he really wanted to leave. But there weren't just hundreds of religious people here. There were even a dozen reporters. Chen Zhao didn't know what media they were from. Was he that free? This wasn't good, very bad. Chen Zhao took out his checkbook and wrote a check for Zhang Xianqing. After receiving the check, Zhang Xuanqing's smile became even brighter. It was as if he was 20 years younger. Oh, what position does Celestial Master Zhang have in the Taoist Culture Association? Honorary Chairman, Zhang Xianqing said. He'll be the vice president from now on, Chen Zhao said. I want to be the chairman, Chen Zhao said matter-of-factly. That's impossible. Mr. Chun, Celestial Master Zhang's reputation and status in the Taoist world wouldn't allow us to do such a thing. Chen Zhao picked up the phone. Hey, cancel a sign check for me. Reason? It was stolen. Wait, Mr. Chun, you can't do that. No, I can't. Chen Zhao looked at Zhang Xianqing with a smile. You haven't cashed the check yet. Even if you did, I can get it back. So, I hope you can calm Zhang Tianchi down. He has to be the honorary vice president whether he wants to or not. If I suddenly hear that he's going to resign, his lawyer will probably talk to you about Chinese law. Zhang Xianqing nodded. Zhang Tianyi wanted to discuss Chen Zhao, and Chen Zhao wanted to discuss Zhang Tianyi. Not to mention other aspects, at least in terms of status in the Taoist Culture Association, he was a notch above him. But, Mr. Chun, you're not even a Taoist, right? 10 million can't even buy a Taoist teaching certificate. Monks had credentials, while Taoists had Taoist teaching certificates. A Taoist teaching certificate was actually a bit complicated because the country didn't recognize you as a Taoist. But it recognized that you were a Taoist who had received the teachings of a Taoist master and disciple. It was a bit awkward and a bit roundabout. It was a way for the country to restrict religions. It prevented religions from becoming too big and even causing disasters to the country and people. Can I not take the money? Sure, but I'll use the 10 million to bribe the media to say something that disrespects Taoist culture. Mr. Chun, do you have a grudge against Zhang Tianyi? No, of course not. We're very good friends. Very good friends? Only a fool would believe you. But Zhang Xianqing was just joking. The 10 million yuan was in his pocket. It was impossible to take it out again. Not many people were willing to donate money to religious associations nowadays. Rich people like Chen Zhao were even more in need of resources. If one looked on the bright side, with a rich person like Chen Zhao, it wouldn't be bad to recognize a Taoist identity. He could use it as a long-term meal ticket. As for Celestial Master Zhang, he could find someone to talk to him about it. Celestial Master Zhang was reasonable and wouldn't make things difficult for him. After all, everyone was here to spread and promote Taoism. Zhang Tianyi, who was on Dragon Tiger Mountain, received a call. He was so angry that he smashed the phone to pieces. This time, he had shot himself in the foot. Zhang Tianyi called his disciples and grand disciples and got into position. They were waiting for Chen Zhao to come. When Chen Zhao reached the top of Dragon Tiger Mountain's Celestial Master Sect, he saw Zhang Tianyi's troops. Among Zhang Tianyi's troops, there were a few that he knew, but he didn't know most of them. Of course, They didn't know Chun Zhao either. They didn't understand what was wrong with Celestial Master Zhang today. At first, they thought that some enemy had come to attack the sect. In the end, only 2 people came. Ha! Old Zhang. Ha! Chun Zhao. 2 hypocrites. It had only been one night, but they were like long-lost old friends. Warm greetings and hugs. Chun Zhao, give me back the honorary chairman of the Taoist Culture Association, Zhang Tianyi said in a low voice. You're the great Celestial Master Zhang. Why do you care about an honorary chairman? That's a part of my luck. I can give it to you, but you can't take it from me. Huh, I'm relieved to hear that. Chun Zhao chuckled. In the distance, the people of the Celestial Master sect saw the old and young chatting happily. They all felt that Zhang Tianyi's action was unnecessary. They didn't understand why Celestial Master Zhang would make such a big scene. There were only a few people who knew Chun Zhao. They were all terrified. Among them, Cui Xin, the guardian beast of the Celestial Master sect, was the most terrified. She didn't know that Chun Zhao would come, nor did she know why he was here. Prior to this, she had never heard of any news at all. In the past, Chun Zhao had left too deep an impression on her. She had almost died in his hands several times. Now, she just wanted to escape to her room, lock the door, close the windows, and sleep for a long time. Yang Guo and the Dragon Girl, a crab human, also knew him. When they were on Demon Island, they had witnessed how terrifying Chun Zhao was. They finally understood that the guy in front of them wasn't weaker than Zhang Tianyi. Therefore, they were wary of Chun Zhao's sudden visit. Chapter 2710. They clearly didn't know that Zhang Tianyi had found Chun Zhao. As for the fight between Chun Zhao and Zhang Tianyi, they basically wouldn't let a third person know. After all, they all had their own personas. Then, Zhang Tianyi dragged him away. The scenery of Mount Longhu was very good. The sea of clouds rose and fell, and the heaven and earth were boundless. As far as the eye could see, there were clouds at the end of the sky and mountains at the end of the clouds. What surprised him was that Dragon Tiger Mountain's spiritual qi wasn't that abundant. At the very least, it seemed to be a level lower than Mao Mountain. As a Taoist sacred land of the same status as Mao Mountain, Chun Zhao did not believe that Dragon Tiger Mountain was so much weaker than the Maoshan sect. That's all there is to Dragon Tiger Mountain, Chun Zhao said deliberately. Zhang Tianyi smiled and didn't refute him immediately. Let's walk around. In fact, Zhang Tianyi's personality was very similar to Chun Zhao's. They were the kind of people who were prideful to the core. Basically, as long as someone slandered them or something about them, they would be punished. They would retaliate without hesitation. It was obvious that Zhang Tianyi was pointing at a cave. Without any cover, it was at the end of the stone path. Chun Zhao and Zhang Tianyi entered the cave side by side. This place wasn't as primitive as Chun Zhao had thought. At the very least, the fluorescent lights along the way, as well as the Wi-Fi coverage along the way, indicated that this was not some primitive cave. After entering this place, the spiritual energy suddenly became abundant. Surprised, Chun Zhao looked back at the hole. There should be some kind of formation set up at the entrance of the cave to seal off the spiritual energy, right? Furthermore, the deeper he went, the more abundant the spiritual qi became. When he was 100 meters into the cave, the spiritual energy had already surpassed that of Mao Mountain. Walking further in, Chun Zhao saw a huge hole. There were more than a dozen people in the cave. They were scattered and seemed to be cultivating or meditating. There was an artifact placed on top of each of the stalactites that emerged from the ground. It could be a bronze cauldron, an ancient sword, or a strange object. Those should be magic tools, or magic treasures as they were called in China. There were many of them, at least 1,000 of them. This is... Chun Zhao looked at Zhang Tianyi in confusion. This is the 1,000 Opportunities Treasure Cave, an important place of Longhu Mountain's Heavenly Master Sect. Zhang Tianyi said, those are all artifacts left behind by previous generations of disciples, and a trace of divine thoughts is stored in them. They are gathered here, forming endless spiritual qi, waiting for their fated person to appear. Zhang Tianyi paused for a moment before continuing. Generally speaking, as long as you're an inner disciple, you can come here to cultivate. If you're lucky, you might even have a fortuitous encounter and obtain a magical treasure to recognize you as its master. Do you mind if I walk around here? When Chun Zhao heard that the treasures here might recognize him as their master, he already had some evil thoughts. In any case, he would find a corner with no one around and neatly collect a few magic treasures. No one would know. So what if he knew? At that time, he would insist that it was a magic treasure that suddenly flew towards him. In any case, once the item was in his hands, it didn't matter if the magic treasure was willing or not. Zhang Tianyi laughed. He knew exactly what Chun Zhao was planning. Zhang Tianyi had long seen through Chun Zhao's weaknesses. It's useless. You'll only be able to pick up scrap metal. Are you doubting my foresight? Even if these things choose you as their master, they'll be meaningless to you. Also, as long as they don't choose their master of their own accord, they'll lose a sliver of their former master's spiritual consciousness and become ordinary objects. So, keep your filthy thoughts to yourself. You didn't bring me here just for me to stare, did you? You must have prepared some big gift for me. Or some divine weapon that no one can subdue and has become a dangerous weapon. So you need me to subdue it. Don't be silly. Zhang Tianyi rolled his eyes and pointed ahead. The direction Zhang Tianyi was pointing at was the center of the venue. It was a stalactite, but there was nothing on it. What? An invisibility magic treasure? No, that's the ultimate treasure of Dragon Tiger Mountain. What do you mean? I don't understand. Where is it? I lost it. Chun Zhao glanced at Zhang Tianyi without saying anything. He waited for him to continue. Dragon Tiger Mountain's infinite universe sword, Mao Mountain's Taoist robe, and Kunlun Mountain's primordial gold strand were all stolen by a monster. You must be joking. How can there be a monster in the world that can do that? Chun Zhao really didn't believe it. He put himself in Zhang Tianyi's shoes. He could steal a magic treasure here and then forcefully break through the encirclement. He could barely do it. Then steal Mao Mountain and Kunlun Mountain? Chun Zhao didn't know what sect Kunlun was. However, be it the status of movies or Taoism, both highlighted the supreme status of Kunlun Mountain. So, Kunlun probably wasn't much weaker than Dragon Tiger Mountain and Mao Mountain. The Taoist Wushu you saw that day is the leader of Kunlun, Zhang Tianyi said. Chun Zhao didn't say anything. He really shouldn't have come this time. Of course, Chun Zhao remembered Taoist Wushu, the cunning old Taoist. The old Taoist gave Chun Zhao a completely different feeling from Zhang Tianyi. Wushu had said that his cultivation wasn't as good as Zhang Tianyi's, but it probably wasn't that bad. If Chun Zhao still wanted to fight Zhang Tianyi to see who was stronger, in that case, Chun Zhao really didn't want to fight perfected Wushu. Wushu gave Chun Zhao the feeling that he was a bottomless pit. During the Tang Dynasty, the world was in chaos and the people had no way to live. Stop. Don't give me a history lesson. I'm not a historian, but I know that period of history. All right, back to main topic. At that time, there was a 1,000-year ancient corpse sealed outside Luoyang City. It was said that the 1,000-year ancient corpse was a great evil from ancient times. In the early days, it wreaked havoc on the human world, causing misery and suffering. It was suppressed by the power of Mount Longhu, Mount Mao, and Mount Kunlun. However, because of the passing of 1,000 years, the world had already forgotten this dusty history. Only the three sects had some information about it, but it was not entirely true. At that time, the 1,000-year ancient corpse was reborn due to the heaven and earth's evil chi gathering for a long time. Only then did it attract the attention of the three sections. At that time, 2 of the 3 sects' sect masters died and 1 was injured. Only the Maoshan sect master was able to escape, and the treasures of the 3 sects were all taken by the 1,000-year ancient corpse. The Maoshan sect master brought back a piece of news. The 1,000-year ancient corpse wanted to refine the 3 treasures into its body and refine a devil body. Then, the cultivators of the Central Plains fought against the 1,000-year ancient corpse for more than 10 years. The thousand-year ancient corpse stirred up a monstrous disaster and swept across the Central Plains. Later on, it was discovered that its devil body was formed on purpose to fight against the cultivators of Huaxia. It used its body to resist the cultivators' magic and magical treasures. In medical terms, it was immunity. After many battles, no one in Huaxia could harm the thousand-year ancient corpse. Finally, a few dozen top cultivators from the Central Plains stood up and fought against the thousand-year ancient corpse. They risked their lives to seal it for 1,000 years. The day after tomorrow will be the day when it will be unsealed. Chapter 27:11. Compared to the leader of Dragon Tiger Mountain back then, who's stronger? Chen Zhao asked. Should be about the same, Zhang Tianyi said. But I definitely know more spells than him. Dragon Tiger Mountain's heritage hasn't been lost, and many top spells have appeared in the future. If that's the case, you can seal him again, right? Chen Zhao asked. As I said, the thousand-year-old corpse's demonic body has already been formed. After being attacked by spells, he's immune to them. Sealing him is also a spell attack, so we can't seal him anymore. Can't the country do anything? Chen Zhao asked. Yes, use nuclear bombs, but in our territory? That's the Qinling Mountains, not the border. Is there no other way? Chen Zhao frowned. For example, a top expert from a special organization? None? Yes, for example, I'm registered in a special organization, but it's useless. Our spells are useless against him. Didn't you say that many new spells appeared in the future? Those spells won't work? What I call new is actually just an improvement on an old spell. The basic principle of the spell has not changed, unless it is a truly new spell, the kind that is created from nothing. But since ancient times, especially from 1,000 years ago, the number of spells created from nothing can be counted on one hand, and there is not a single spell that can work in this battle, Zhang Tianyi said helplessly. 1,000 years ago, he should have fought against an enhancer like me, right? Is he immune to physical attacks too? In ancient times, people like you were called Hercules, Zhang Tianyi said. That thousand-year-old corpse fought with Hercules, but he's not immune to physical attacks. To be immune to physical attacks, he has to kill Newton first. Zhang Tianyi was joking, of course. His meaning was simple. A demonic body could increase one's immunity, but the laws of physics were the foundation of the universe. A demonic body could change one's immunity, but it couldn't change the laws of the universe, unless that thousand-year-old corpse was an immortal. If he really became an immortal, then they shouldn't fight anymore. In that case, they should stop fighting and just go back to their own homes and find their own mothers. I don't think 3 great cultivators from the ancient times couldn't even deal with an old monster with a cultivation base similar to yours, let alone an old monster who hasn't cultivated a fiend body. But after cultivating a fiend body, I can deal with him alone. First of all, that thousand-year ancient corpse was already prepared. According to the records, when he was alive, he was most likely a cultivator with an exceedingly high cultivation. He knew many powerful Dao laws, and because of this, he was able to defeat the 3 senior headmasters. Secondly, their techniques were most likely already broken, and this was the real reason why the 3 senior headmasters were defeated. Moreover, if one of the 3 was a strong warrior, then the outcome of the battle is still unknown. Since the ancient times, there have been many famous strong warriors, but there has never been a truly powerful one. It could even be said that you are the strongest strong warrior since the ancient times. So, I invited you back from abroad for this battle. At this moment, Zhang Tianyi's tone was quite sincere because this was the first time he had used the word please. You are the key to our battle. No matter what you say, I won't do it if you want me to die. Just then, Zhang Tianyi took out a bank card and handed it to Chen Zhao. What? You want to bribe me with money? Stop joking. Even if you sell Dragon Tiger Mountain, you might not be richer than me. This is the reward from a country. It was originally for me, but now it's for you. Zhang Tianyi looked at Chen Zhao seriously. Chen Zhao's expression turned ugly. This old guy was using righteousness to pressure him. I'll say this first, Chen Zhao said. If I find that I can't win, I'll run first. Then, Chun Zhao forcefully took the card from Zhang Tiany's fingers. Let's go. Follow me. Where to? I prepared a weapon for you. Weapon? You said you've prepared a weapon for me? Chun Zhao didn't mind weapons, but what kind of weapon could he use? Even if he was given an aircraft carrier, Chun Zhao would think that it was too light. Carry a mountain and throw it at him? Most importantly, even metal wouldn't be able to hold it, let alone rock. It wasn't that he couldn't lift it, but that he couldn't support his own weight. Do you know that there's a strongman monument in China? I don't. Why? Since ancient times, thousands of top strongmen have integrated a trace of their spiritual will into the strongman monument. Originally, the strongman monument was placed in the capital, but it was borrowed by the government and sent to Mount Longhu. What's the use of that? What's the use? As long as you get the monument's recognition, you can borrow the power of the strongman's soul. The monument can also change its weight according to your will. Chun Zhao's eyes brightened. Changing its weight according to my will? That's good. Is it for me? Don't even think about it. The monument is used to guard the dragon's vein. It's only temporarily lent to you. Fine, fine. Chun Zhao twitched his lips. Zhang Tiany brought Chun Zhao to his secret room. There was only a table in the room with a plate covered by a red cloth. Removing the red cloth revealed a stone mace. This is the strongman monument you were talking about? It doesn't look... Shut up. It's a national treasure. Be more respectful. Fine. Chun Zhao shrugged. What do you want me to do now? Kneel 3 times and kowtow 9 times? Hold it and pick it up. Chun Zhao took a deep breath and grabbed the mace. Instantly, countless divine consciousnesses rushed out of the mace. They turned into phantoms and rushed into Chun Zhao's mind. The phantoms seemed to be real. Chun Zhao slowly closed his eyes. But a second later, Chun Zhao's eyes flew open. At the same time, he lifted the mace. But then he put it down again. What's wrong? This thing is useless. Useless? How? My power is already greater than all the strongmen combined, Chun Zhao said helplessly. That's why it's only handy to me. Also, it's too fragile. I don't even dare to use my full strength. I can't afford to hurt it. Zhang Tiany frowned. Greater than the combined power of all the strongmen with their souls? Just how strong was Chun Zhao? Because he didn't have a specific number, Zhang Tiany couldn't accurately judge Chun Zhao's power. But hearing Chun Zhao's words, he was still shocked. The combined power of thousands of strong people. The moment Chun Zhao let go, the table with the plate collapsed and the mace fell to the ground. Boom! The secret room collapsed too. Then the ground shook violently. Zhang Tiany charged out of the secret room. Then he saw a huge depression in the ground. The center of the depression was the secret room. Chun Zhao walked out of the ruins unhurriedly. You did on purpose, right? I just forgot to remove the weight of the mace. Chun Zhao shrugged as if he really forgot. Zhang Tiany didn't believe him. After all, Chun Zhao was the person who understood weight the most in this world, and perhaps in all of history. He couldn't forget how destructive a heavy object could be to the environment. Chapter 2712. The commotion here also attracted some attention. Cui Xin was one of them. She'd been paying attention to Chun Zhao and Zhang Tiany's conversation. First, she'd seen Zhang Tiany bring Chun Zhao to the Thousand Opportunities Cave. Then, they'd come to this wooden house that was rather far from the main buildings. Then, they seemed to have gotten into an argument and even fought. This wooden house had clearly been destroyed because of their conflict. However, their conflict had ended as quickly as it had started. Very soon, it stopped again. These were all Cui Xin's personal guesses. Chun Zhao and Zhang Tiany actually knew that Cui Xin wasn't far away. However, neither of them paid attention to her. When do we leave? The day after tomorrow, Zhang Tiany said. We'll take a private plane and arrive before midnight. So, if everything goes well, we'll encounter that 1,000-year-old corpse when the Enshi is the strongest in the world? Chun Zhao asked, frowning. Not only when the Enshi is the strongest in the world, but it's the strongest in the past 1,000 years, Zhang Tiany said seriously. Why? Why must he choose the best time to die? Because he'll break the seal at that time, Zhang Tiany said. Zhang Tiany said, Regardless of whether it's the supernatural world or the higher-ups, they won't allow such a peerless great demon to move freely for even a minute. As long as he's given a quarter of an hour, he can completely disappear and cause an unimaginable catastrophe. Chun Zhao took a deep breath. Has something like this ever happened before? Do you know about the Tianqi explosion 400 years ago? Wasn't determined to be the explosion of Wang Gong Residence's gunpowder warehouse. There's no conclusion, but some people in the Huaxia spiritual world, and I know that it was an accident in the Dragon Lock Well. I've heard of the Dragon Lock Well. It said that there's a dragon locked inside. Is that true? In fact, there's a 3,000-year-old firebird locked inside. It is called the Fire Ghost, and it feeds on living souls. It is said that it was trapped by Liu Bowen in the early Ming dynasty. Later, Zhu Di moved the capital to suppress the Fire Ghost with the Imperial Dragon Qi, Zhang Tianyi said slowly. Even he couldn't tell whether it was true or not. Chun Zhao listened with great interest. Zhang Tianyi continued. The original intention was to use the Imperial Dragon Qi to suppress the Fire Ghost. But as the capital moved north, the Fire Ghost's magical power reached the heavens and earth. It was actually able to devour the Qi of the Imperial Dragon Qi while suppressing it. The Qi of the Imperial Dragon Qi also weakened. This is also why after Zhu Di, almost everyone in the Ming dynasty was mediocre. There wasn't another emperor as powerful as Zhu Yuanzhang or Zhu Di. In the 5th year of the Tianqi era, the Imperial Dragon Qi finally couldn't suppress the Fire Ghost anymore. As time went by, the Fire Ghost used the Qi of the Imperial Dragon Qi to break free from the seal. Its magical power was also several times stronger than before. It was also at that time that the cultivators of the Central Plains all came out and fought for 100 days, finally wiping out the Fire Ghost. However, the aftermath affected the entire Central Plains. First, the Tianqi Emperor died the next year. Some say that it was because the Qi of the Imperial Dragon Qi was weak, causing the Tianqi Emperor to lose the protection of the Qi of the Imperial Dragon. Then, the country was destroyed by Emperor Chongzhen. Zhang Tianyi looked at Chun Zhao. This is also why the higher-ups are paying so much attention to it. Not only can a great demon cause misery, but it can also destroy a country. The dragon and old monster Kunlai that I killed before were also great demons, but I think they can only cause trouble in one place at most. Isn't overthrowing the government a bit too scary? Although the great serpent dragon and old monster Kunlai sound like they're on the same level as the Fire Ghost, they're actually miles apart. Let's not talk about the others. Just these two alone had participated in the Fire Ghost calamity back then. At that time, the two of them combined couldn't even match up to the Fire Ghost. Is the difference that big? You fought them before. How strong do you think they are? Chun Zhao pursed his lips. He really didn't think they were that strong. I'll find a quiet place to go into seclusion for 2 days, Chun Zhao said. What? You're not confident in this battle? How can I be confident? Would you believe me if I said, I'm 100% confident? Where are you going? Dragon Tiger Mountain can provide you with a place. No, you can't. Chun Zhao shook his head. If you're worried about old friends disturbing you, don't worry. Cui Xin can't wait to avoid you. With that, Zhang Tianyi glanced at Cui Xin, who was hiding not far away. Zhang Tianyi roughly knew what Cui Xin was thinking. After all, Chun Zhao had left too deep of a trauma in Cui Xin's heart. No, I just need a better place to go into seclusion. Chun Zhao planned to find a place with no one and then enter the river map. Because the river map was very important, Chun Zhao brought it with him on this trip. If you're not satisfied with Dragon Tiger Mountain, you won't be able to find a better place in all of Huaxia, unless you go to the capital. Zhang Tianyi knew that Chun Zhao was afraid of trouble, so he couldn't go to the capital. Chun Zhao shook his head. I just know a better place. Seeing that Chun Zhao had made up his mind, Zhang Tianyi didn't try to persuade him anymore. What Chun Zhao needed now was time. Chun Zhao could vaguely feel it. The thing he dug out from old monster Kunlai's brain that day was very important. It wasn't crucial to this battle. It was crucial to his future path. Inner world, chaotic aura. Chun Zhao had found a very secluded place. No one would come to this place for sure. This was the second highest peak in the world that was the hardest to climb, Mount Chogo. Chun Zhao dug a crack in the ice himself. After entering, he sealed the crack. Chun Zhao buried himself in the belly of the mountain. In the belly of the mountain, Chun Zhao hadn't entered the river map yet. Suddenly, a strange aura came from under his feet. This aura was completely different from magical power. It was similar to the immortal qi that he cultivated, but it wasn't exactly the same. Chun Zhao used brute force and smashed through the rock layer. As he went deeper, the aura became clearer. By then, Chun Zhao had smashed through at least 10,000 meters of rock and reached the bottom of Mount Chogo. Finally, after Chun Zhao punched through a thick layer of rock, the bottom suddenly collapsed. Chun Zhao fell into a huge lava cave. Below them was a huge lava lake, and in the center of the lava lake stood a tall tower. On the platform of the tower, a withered body sat cross-legged. It was a body that had lost its vitality long ago, but its power still remained. This power had been protecting the body, preventing it from being affected by the surrounding heat. Even its clothes weren't damaged at all. Chun Zhao was very confused about this body. Judging from its clothes, it was at least 300 years old. It also had some bronze items, so Chun Zhao suspected that it might be even older, even more than 2,000 years old. But its power still hadn't completely dissipated. Who was it when it was alive? How could it stay for so long without losing its power? Chapter 27:13. Now, Chun Zhao understood a little. Why was Huaxiao the largest region in the spiritual world? Just go to some barren mountains and rivers. Then, he encountered an old skeleton that had passed away. This 1,000-year-old skeleton could be said to be a perpetual motion machine. Of course, the so-called perpetual motion machine didn't mean that it was endless. Instead, it was like hydroelectric or wind power. It formed a link with the environment, and from there, it grew and multiplied endlessly. Even if he lost his life, even if he lost control, this cycle was still perfectly preserved. Even Chun Zhao couldn't create such a near-perfect cycle. Chun Zhao wanted to move the skeleton into the river diagram. But the moment he touched the skeleton suddenly turned to dust. At the same time, the thing hidden under the skeleton was exposed. It was dozens of ancient words carved on the platform. They were all hieroglyphs. Chun Zhao couldn't understand what they said at all. Suddenly, Chun Zhao's body heated up. His small world seemed to be absorbing the surrounding flame energy. Chun Zhao's heart jumped. These weren't hieroglyphs. These were the circulation routes. Moreover, this was the circulation route of the small world. This was the foundation of the small world, the circulation route of the heavenly pattern. However, the route extended to the inside of the body. Then it was suddenly cut off. No, he couldn't cultivate it. After absorbing the surrounding flame energy, he wouldn't be able to continue the cultivation method. This cultivation method wasn't complete. Chun Zhao's expression darkened. Was this thing used to trick people? Fortunately, his body was extraordinary. He didn't absorb much flame energy either. If he was a normal person or a regular cultivator, after absorbing the flame energy, he would probably self-combust. This guy had bad intentions even after he died. Chun Zhao felt that this guy had bad intentions. But thinking carefully, he suddenly felt that it wasn't right. If this guy really wanted to trick people, he wouldn't hide in such an undiscoverable place. Once the terrain changed, this place would probably disappear. Chun Zhao carefully observed the hieroglyphs again. After absorbing the flame energy, there should still be a circulation route. But the flame energy was different from spiritual energy. It shouldn't be absorbed into the Dantian. Then where should it be? Chun Zhao started thinking. Chun Zhao could vaguely feel that this circulation route seemed to be somewhat similar to old monster Kunlai's nameless technique. Could it be that this was the completed part of the inner world's cultivation method? However, the inner world needed the primal chaos qi that was obtained after refining the extreme yin qi and extreme yang qi. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be this kind of scorching flame qi. Chun Zhao thought for a while. If he used the cultivation method of the inner world, it seemed a little risky. After all, he only had a preliminary understanding of the cultivation method of the inner world. He didn't know much about it, and now he was using a cultivation technique of unknown origin to fuse it. The risk was still quite high, but there was still a voice in Chen Zhao's mind. It seemed to be constantly telling him that his train of thought was correct. Chen Zhao decided to try this. It was risky, but he was ambitious. Chen Zhao sat down and carefully absorbed the surrounding heat. It was different from the previous passive absorption. This time, Chen Zhao was more proactive. Not only did the flames not resist, but they were even more agreeable to his absorption. After the flame, energy flowed through the heavenly patterns on the small world. It was channeled into his body. At that moment, even though Chen Zhao possessed the nirvana flame, he still felt like his entire body was being engulfed by the scorching aura. His meridians were also throbbing with pain. Chen Zhao gritted his teeth and forcefully activated the nirvana flame to repair the damage to his meridians. However, Chen Zhao wasn't worried about the pain that wasn't fatal, because Chen Zhao's greatest ability was adaptability. As expected, in just a few minutes, the burning pain from the flame energy began to subside. Although it didn't completely disappear, it was within an acceptable range. Chen Zhao began to open his inner world according to the cultivation method of the inner world. What was the inner world? The sea of consciousness, its own world. Chen Zhao's eyes turned red and lost focus. The flame energy was absorbed into the sea of consciousness. The sea of consciousness was instantly covered by flames. It seemed like it was about to collapse. Chen Zhao suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. However, he couldn't stop the cultivation method no matter what. The flame energy seemed to want to burn Chen Zhao's sea of consciousness. The nirvana flame. Chen Zhao immediately fused the nirvana flame into his sea of consciousness. He hoped that the nirvana flame could repair his sea of consciousness. However, Chen Zhao had miscalculated. The nirvana flame could only repair a body with vitality. The sea of consciousness was the source of the spirit. It didn't exist in the body. Moreover, after the flame energy came into contact with the nirvana flame, it didn't weaken. Instead, it surged even more violently. Chen Zhao felt like his head was about to split open. No, the two weren't the same cultivation method at all. He was cultivating in a suicidal manner. He had to think of a way to turn the situation around. Chen Zhao forced himself to calm down and started analyzing. Since the flame energy could be absorbed into the inner world, it should be the same as Kunlai's cultivation method. However, the two weren't the same. This meant that the two had something in common. It wasn't completely out of place. Chen Zhao went through Kunlai's cultivation method in his mind. Since the inner world was called the inner world, it should have something in common with the outer world. What did he miss out on? Chen Zhao's brain worked rapidly. Heavenly pattern. The only difference between the inner world and the outer world was that there were no heavenly patterns. However, this heavenly pattern wasn't his in the beginning. He'd stolen a heavenly pattern from the inner world and then made it his. Could he also fuse the heavenly pattern into the inner world? Chen Zhao immediately fused the inner world into his body. Then, he released the flame energy and let the heavenly pattern carry it. As expected, the violence in the inner world stopped. The pain was still there, but the destructive flame energy stopped temporarily. His sea of consciousness also started to repair itself. This was a trick that Chen Zhao had found not long ago. It was a method that Chen Zhao had figured out himself. It was used to increase his combat ability. He'd used it when he'd fought Zhang Tianyi before. Now, it seemed that he'd accidentally found this key point. Chen Zhao was invigorated. He tried to stuff the heavenly pattern into the inner world. It seemed to work. The inner world didn't reject the fusion of the heavenly pattern. The two were very compatible. It was even smoother than Chen Zhao had imagined. Soon, the heavenly pattern had completely fused into his sea of consciousness. At the same time, it felt like the outer world in his sea of consciousness. At that moment, Chen Zhao felt like he had the power to lift the sky. It was the power emitted from the inner world. After fusing with the heavenly pattern, When he channeled the flame energy, it no longer brought Chun Zhao pain. Instead, it nourished him. Chapter 27:14. Chun Zhao entered the river diagram. He started to study the series of techniques he'd just completed. To be honest, if Chun Zhao hadn't saved himself just now, he might really have died. In the past, Chun Zhao had always explored and cultivated by himself, but had never been so dangerous. This time, if there was even the slightest mistake, it was possible that both his body and soul would be destroyed. Then, like the 1,000-year-old skeleton, he would be left with an empty shell. Luckily, he'd passed this trial. With the previous lesson, Chun Zhao had to be much more careful. Of course, both domestic cultivators and foreign spiritualists were the same. Only after suffering would one learn to be careful. But most of the time, suffering could mean losing one's life. Of course, this was also a danger that a pioneer had to face. In this era, there was probably no one who could guide Chun Zhao. Chun Zhao felt his inner world. After merging with the heavenly pattern, the outer world and inner world also merged into one. After studying for a long time, Chun Zhao finally figured out the function of the inner world. The inner world and the outer world formed a whole. It was different from the outer world, which was restricted by its surroundings. The inner world didn't have any restrictions. There was a saying, "The greater the heart, the greater the power." The inner world was also very suitable. The difference was how much power the body could withstand. In this aspect, Chun Zhao had the most advantage, at least compared to Zhang Tianyi, Bifla, and the 23rd Blood Mary. Chun Zhao was undoubtedly the one who could withstand it the most. Chun Zhao realized that Kunlai's technique wasn't complete. The cultivation technique he'd found here was also incomplete. Both were used to cultivate the inner world, but the methods were different. One was to absorb yin and yang chaotic qi, while the other was to absorb the more violent flame qi. Not only could he absorb the flame qi, but he could also absorb lava directly. To put it more directly, he could store lava in his brain and the inner world inside. Normal people wouldn't do this. Even people with the same cultivation as Chun Zhao wouldn't store lava directly. The weight of the lava wouldn't disappear. It would still become a part of the body. But Chun Zhao didn't care, because he could completely withstand it. Through two completely different cultivation methods, Chun Zhao figured out a brand new cultivation method that belonged to him. One benefit of absorbing lava was that the lava contained a huge amount of flame qi. It was far denser than the flame qi in the air, and it was much more convenient to extract it. By releasing the flame qi from his inner world, Chun Zhao could instantly turn his small world into a scorching purgatory. It could even reach the surface of the sun in a small area. Moreover, the extra weight of the magma would give him a more realistic sense of impact in close combat. This was especially true when Meteor was released. The weight it brought would turn Meteor into a destructive move. However, the disadvantage was also obvious. It would make it difficult for him to move around, especially when taking public transportation, unless Chun Zhao stayed in the air forever. This would have a serious impact on his private life. Therefore, Chun Zhao still decided to absorb the magma first, then enter the river diagram to absorb the heat in the magma, and then come out to absorb the magma. Although this cultivation method was complicated, it was very effective. Chun Zhao did it step by step. In the beginning, he was rather careful. However, as he familiarized himself with the entire process, his cultivation speed increased. The speed at which he absorbed the lava was extremely fast, and through the 1,000-fold time difference in the river diagram, the speed at which he absorbed the fiery aura was even faster. His inner world could contain an unlimited amount of fiery aura, which meant that there was no limit to this cultivation method. However, there was a problem: the cultivation speed and how much his body could contain. Chun Zhao had a godlike artifact like the river diagram, so his cultivation speed increased by leaps and bounds. However, other people clearly didn't have such treasures. The growth of his inner world was the growth of his spiritual power. As Chun Zhao continuously absorbed the fiery aura, his spiritual power was also close to being able to control objects. This was the so-called psychokinesis. Of course, even without psychokinesis, Chun Zhao could still move anything in his inner world. However, psychokinesis was psychokinesis. It was a sign of highly condensed spiritual power. Some people were born with psychokinesis because their spiritual power was naturally higher than normal people's. They also knew how to condense their spiritual power. However, Chun Zhao's psychokinesis wasn't born with superior spiritual power. It was purely because it was huge. Moreover, Chun Zhao realized that he could start a fire anywhere in his inner world. If his opponent was a normal person, he could burn them to ashes with a single thought. Chun Zhao felt that he had to give himself a title from the supernatural world, such as Lava Tyrant. However, when he thought about it, Lava Tyrant sounded like a villain no matter how he thought about it. At least he'd done a few positive things in the open and in the dark. Therefore, if he wanted to give it a name, he needed a more positive one. For example, God of Fire or God of the Sun. However, Bifla had once said that he couldn't casually use the names and titles of gods on himself. Without the power of a god, he shouldn't covet the title of a god. That would only bring him misfortune. 2 days later, Chun Zhao finally crawled out of the crack in the ice. Right now, Chogo Peak was engulfed in a snowstorm. The visibility was no more than 5 meters. Even Chun Zhao's supervision couldn't see more than this. However, Chun Zhao's inner world had already covered more than 2,000 meters. In these 2 days, Chun Zhao's inner world had expanded again. It was now 2,000 meters in diameter. Chun Zhao's spiritual power had also increased by more than 10 times. He could even see the shape of each falling snowflake. Just then, a dozen figures appeared in Chun Zhao's perception range. They were the mountaineering team. Their original plan was to go to the next station. However, they were attacked by a snowstorm on the way. As a result, they had to advance and retreat. In such a snowstorm, they couldn't even move 200 meters in 10 hours. After a short discussion, they decided to continue climbing the mountain and try to reach the next station before dark. Chun Zhao stood in the snowstorm and eavesdropped on their conversation. They didn't talk much, and they were all using walkie-talkies. However, Chun Zhao still heard their conversation and learned of their current predicament. A few of them were already out of energy. If he didn't do anything, they might die here. After all, the mortality rate on Chogo Peak was as high as 27%. Chun Zhao felt that if he didn't interfere, they would really die here. Chapter 27:15. This wasn't a pleasant process. Mountaineers were warriors. They used this process to challenge themselves. They challenged the limits of humans, but at the same time, they used their uncertain future to warn others. They were similar to Chun Zhao in this aspect. They were both walking on a tightrope. They were both walking on an unknown path. They followed the footprints that their predecessors couldn't recognize. If they took a step, they might see boundless light or a bottomless abyss. Of course, the biggest possibility was that the team would collapse along the way. Cold and fatigue eroded their willpower. Chun Zhao lifted his head and looked at the sky. Perhaps he could control the weather in a small area. Chun Zhao consciously released his scorching heat into the sky. There was a thundercloud thousands of meters up in the sky. The thundercloud was affected by the cold air, causing a snowstorm. Moreover, Mount Chogo was located at the border of Central Asia. The hot wind from Central Asia rubbed against the cold air, creating a strong collision of air currents. This was also the reason why Mount Chogo's weather was extremely bad most of the time. Chun Zhao thought that he should be able to disperse the thundercloud. Of course, he could save the team with his own hands. However, doing so would shatter the faith in their hearts. It might even topple their worldview. Just think about it. They'd worked so hard, but others could even stand on the side and watch. They could easily accomplish what they tried their best to do. To them, this was a disaster of faith. Moreover, Chun Zhao wanted to try doing some things that he couldn't do in the past. For example, the ability to summon the wind and rain in the legends. The heat Chun Zhao released quickly formed a huge ball of hot air. It crashed into the thundercloud in the sky. Boom! The huge impact cleared the sky. The team all looked up at the sky. They didn't understand what was happening, but they didn't think too much about it. After all, in such an extremely harsh environment, anything could happen. But before Chun Zhao could be happy, the cumulus clouds gathered again. Chun Zhao could feel that an even bigger storm was about to form. Because the hot air he'd released had replaced the air in the surrounding area, the hot air was changing its home field with the cold air in the surrounding area. At the same time, the collision between the cold and hot air became more intense. In other words, he'd created a superstorm with his own hands. He had to admit that this was a new skill that he'd unintentionally developed. This was basically a disguised strategic weapon. However, there was one drawback to this skill. It was useless against high-level players. Basically, it was used to slaughter civilians. Why would you want something like that? Be a bastard against humanity? Chun Zhao felt like his brain was filled with lava. However, he wouldn't go so far as to do something so stupid. This skill's destruction and lethality couldn't compare to Meteor. Unless Chun Zhao used this skill in a tropical or subtropical city with a sunny beach. The people there all wore casual shorts. However, releasing flame chi in such a place would only bring about tropical storms. If it was thrown in an area like Siberia, it would at most reduce the number of wild animals in the area, and its lethality to humans would be close to zero. After all, everyone who lived in Siberia wore a few windbreakers. Chun Zhao looked at the mountaineering team. It looked like he had done something stupid. He had made their situation even more difficult. He could only give up on trying to save them by changing the environment. Chun Zhao helped them block the wind. At the same time, he raised the surrounding temperature appropriately, temporarily lowering the difficulty for them. Lee, do you feel it? That's weird. The wind is weaker and the temperature is rising. Birmingham, do you know what's going on? That's weird. Why is it like this? Is it our near-death hallucination? For what I can see, there's still a blizzard 600 meters ahead, but why is the blizzard blocked? The team member glanced at his watch. The surrounding temperature is 12 degrees. Is there something wrong? Chun Zhao ignored these rambling climbers. After they reached the base, Chun Zhao left Chogo Peak. Just then his phone rang. Chun Zhao, where are you? I'm on my way to Dragon Tiger Mountain. More accurately, I'm in the stratosphere. You can fly that high. I'm suddenly envious of you. I wonder if I can make it in time to focus on strengthening. Zhang Tianyi was confident that he wasn't weaker than Chun Zhao. However, he couldn't fly that high. It wasn't that Zhang Tianyi couldn't fly, but he couldn't move long distances at that height. The low temperature, low pressure, and cosmic radiation were all very threatening to Zhang Tianyi. However, for someone like Chun Zhao, these extreme environments didn't affect him at all. You better hurry. Our plane leaves at 3 in the afternoon. You still have 2 hours. You seem to have some misunderstanding about my movement speed. Even if I fly by myself, I'll reach the Qinling Mountains before you. Forget it. I have nothing to talk about with a bastard with a monstrous body like you. Zhang Tianyi was full of envy and jealousy. However, his cultivation direction was completely different from Chun Zhao's. While he was envious, he couldn't become Chun Zhao. Pop! When Chun Zhao landed on Dragon Tiger Mountain, he was stopped by the mountain's protective array. However, Chun Zhao still landed forcefully. The protective array didn't forcefully curse Chun Zhao's landing. It seemed that if he exceeded a certain limit, the array would automatically let him through. Chun Zhao arrived at the main hall of Dragon Tiger Mountain's Celestial Master's sect. Zhang Tianyi walked out, followed by 4 young men and women. The 4 young men and women were all beauties. The men were extraordinarily handsome, and the women were youthful and beautiful. However, their clothes didn't fit in with the Celestial Master's sect. They looked like 4 fashionable men and women. It was even more awkward for them to follow behind Zhang Tianyi. Old Zhang, are you planning to form a team and debut? Looking at your position, it looks like you're going to debut at the center position. With that, Chun Zhao was immediately stared at by 4 death stares. When the 4 young men looked at Chun Zhao, their eyes were filled with hostility. Before you have enough strength, hide your thoughts. Otherwise, you'll be killed by that bastard. Zhang Tianyi didn't need to turn his head to know what the four young men were thinking. Chen Zhao was 29 now. The oldest of the four was probably only in their early 20s. Naturally, Chen Zhao was their senior. Of course, those four arrogant and unruly juniors. He definitely wouldn't accept Chen Zhao's identity as a senior. If you're not convinced, just come over. Chen Zhao, you're not here to discipline the kids for me. Chapter 27:16. Advisor, we want to try and see how big the difference is between us and this master you hired. No need to try. If the difference isn't big, you can recognize yourselves. But if it's too big, the difference will be meaningless. Zhang Tianyi rejected the young people's request decisively. Just then, Chen Zhao interrupted. Old Zhang, I'm happy to help you take care of these kids. The word kids sounded too awkward coming from Chen Zhao's mouth. It felt like he was mocking the young people. Chen Zhao didn't care if Zhang Tianyi was happy or not. He stepped forward. Come, all four of you together. Zhang Tianyi's face darkened. Do you need to discipline my great disciples? Chen Zhao, stop messing around. We still have to go to the airport. It's fine. It'll end soon. Zhang Tianyi was upset. It was fine if Chen Zhao couldn't persuade him. After all, he didn't have any good intentions. But his great disciples were also like this. What was going on? Just then, one of the girls walked out. Her hair instantly turned red. Sir, please. The red-haired girl's entire body was emitting hot flames. Special bloodline. Chen Zhao was surprised. You don't look hot enough. I'll add some more. Chen Zhao didn't seem to do anything, but the flames on the red-haired girl suddenly turned deep red. Ah, hot, hot. Ah. Chen Zhao immediately retracted the flames and absorbed the red-haired girls. The flames were finally extinguished. Sorry, I've been studying fire spells recently, Chen Zhao said, chuckling. At the same time, he glanced at Zhang Tianyi from the corner of his eye. Zhang Tianyi's eyelids twitched in anger. He was always protective. Of course, he wasn't happy to see Chen Zhao bully his disciple. Zhang Tianyi glanced at Chen Zhao and lowered his head. He secretly sent a telepathic message to his four disciples. Don't use lightning and water, Zhang Tianyi said. He's better at those two. Zhou Yi, Wei Ming, you don't need to do anything. Fanya, you can use chaos spells to create some trouble for him. Just a little trouble and we'll win. Grandmaster, even if he knows thunder, water, and fire, it can only be said that his spell system is very complicated. He can't be compared to pure awakened ones like us. Huh? His magic system isn't complicated. He isn't a fire element, nor is he a water element, nor is he a lightning element. He's a Hercules, a strengthening element. That's what he's best at. Hercules? That's even less of a problem. I don't believe I will lose to a strong man. Don't be silly. Zhang Tianyi rolled his eyes. If you look down on him just because he's a strong man, the next time you meet him, you'll only be crushed into a fried dough twist. Zhang Tian pointed at the red-haired girl on the ground. A clear mind technique fell on her body, moisturizing her burnt skin. Fanya, whom he called out, walked out and said, Your Excellency, please advise me. Zhang Tianyi kept staring at Chen Zhao. He could vaguely feel that Chen Zhao's aura seemed to have changed after 2 days. This was also why he didn't forcefully stop his four great disciples from challenging Chen Zhao. He wanted to test Chen Zhao with the four of them. Fanya's aura was very obscure. Chen Zhao could feel her aura, but he couldn't tell what element it was. Chen Zhao tilted his head and looked at Fanya. With a point of his finger, a ball of flame appeared before Fanya. But the moment the flame approached Fanya, it actually turned into nothingness. No element. Chen Zhao raised an eyebrow. Fanya seemed to have the same constitution as him. She could turn all directional spells into elemental spiritual qi. Of course, the biggest feature of an elemental constitution wasn't just immunity to most spells. Moreover, it could directly absorb spirit qi and use it to transform into magical power to attack. Fanya was very good at this. She directly turned the fire qi Chen Zhao released into her own attack. Fanya pushed her palm out and a huge palm, several meters wide, slapped at Chun Zhao. Whoosh! The palm landed on Chun Zhao's body directly. Chun Zhao took a step back. Chun Zhao was stunned. Zhang Tianyi suddenly laughed out loud. Chun Zhao, you lost. Ha! You actually lost to my great disciple. Chun Zhao's face darkened. He looked at Fanya. He didn't want to admit it, but he didn't want to argue either, even if he'd been distracted just now. Let's go, Chun Zhao said with a dark expression. We have to catch a flight. Zhang Tianyi was very excited that Chun Zhao had lost. Last time, he lost to Chun Zhao. This time, his great disciple had actually helped him win. This made him very excited, even if the victory and defeat were just on the surface. If they really fought, the four juniors wouldn't even be able to last a second against Chun Zhao. Fanya was able to become his great disciple because Zhang Tianyi had actually raised her like a personal disciple. In terms of talent, Fanya wasn't actually outstanding. It could even be said to be very mediocre. At least, she was much more mediocre than the other three. But Zhang Tianyi saw Chun Zhao's shadow in Fanya, even though the two were a solar system apart. But Zhang Tianyi really wanted to copy a monster like Chun Zhao. Moreover, after reading through the books, he realized that Fanya's constitution was the legendary chaotic constitution. All elements would return to chaos when they approached her. In terms of Dharma, Fanya's absorption ability wasn't strong and her comprehension was mediocre. But Zhang Tianyi had high hopes for Fanya. Compared to the other three geniuses, he even thought more highly of Fanya. Fanya didn't just have the characteristic of turning spells of other elements into chaos. Furthermore, she was very compatible with it. She could be compatible with all elements. For example, fire and water. For normal cultivators, these two elements countered each other. But Fanya wouldn't feel any conflict at all. Moreover, Zhang Tianyi could better understand Chun Zhao's weakness from Fanya. This was also one of his plans. The other three young men were also very proud. After all, Fanya was also one of them. Fanya's victory was their victory. Okay, pack up. You don't have to do anything in the Qinling Mountains. You just have to watch from the side. This demon-subduing trip will be the battle and responsibility you'll face in the future. Yes, this disciple will follow your instructions. They're going to? Are you sure they're not feeding the 1,000-year-old corpse? Chun Zhao looked at Zhang Tianyi with a strange expression. Ha! Don't forget, that little girl defeated you before. If you can go, why can't she go? Zhang Tianyi said with a smile, even though the two of them were well aware of it. But Zhang Tianyi liked to use this reason to annoy Chun Zhao. Actually, he just wanted to bring Fanya and let her see how her senior fought. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.